Hey guys, tonight we're not heading into grand ballrooms or lavish estates. No velvet gowns, no gilded chandeliers. Instead, we're tiptoeing into a narrow brick terrace house on a rainy Tuesday morning in Victorian England. Through the back door, of course, because the front one is mostly for show. You're not a duchess. You're not even a servant in a duchess's house. You're a housewife. And not the leisurely kind either. You're the type who rises before dawn, ties her apron with the precision of a general heading into battle, and somehow manages to clean an entire house using soot vinegar. And you're not going to believe this: breadcrumbs. Yes, breadcrumbs. The same ones you were supposed to save for the pudding. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always find it oddly comforting to know we're all falling asleep to the same peculiar slice of history, no matter how far apart we are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The room you wake up in is dim and smells faintly of damp wool ashes and boiled cabbage. Welcome to the scullery. The fire's gone out in the kitchen range and your bones already know it before your feet touch the cold stone floor. The water in the jug has a film on it. You take a deep breath, which you immediately regret there's a lingering hint of whatever died in the pantry last week. Or maybe that's just the cheese. Before the sun fully rises, you've already lit a match with fingers so cold they barely bend. The match fails. You curse gently, nothing profane, just the sort of grumble Victorian housewives were permitted to mutter under their breath without risking damnation. The second match catches. The fire is coaxed to life barely. You've got 6 rooms to clean, not including the outhouse, and you haven't even boiled water yet. You start with the hearth. Always the hearth. It's the heart of the house, but also its dirtiest corner. Coal ash drifts like sad confetti. You take the hearth brush, a stiff bristled little brute, and sweep slowly, methodically. Not because you enjoy it, but because if you go too fast, the ash just floats back into the air like it's mocking you. Now for the soot marks on the tiles. You don't have bleach, obviously. What you do have is vinegar, a rag made from an old shirt, and oddly enough a crust of bread. Not toasted, not buttered, just stale. You use it to polish the marble because apparently someone once decided that crumbs are mildly abrasive. And here you are scrubbing with breadcrumbs because it's better than nothing, and definitely better than the newspaper pages you used last week that left ink stains on everything. Historians still argue whether breadcrumb cleaning was actually effective or just another folk remedy passed down out of desperation. But it doesn't really matter. It's what you have. And Victorian housekeeping is a relentless exercise in making do with less than ideal tools. The windows come next. Not the glass, you haven't seen real clean glass in years. Just the ledges. You scrape the dead flies off with a bent spoon and wonder briefly if they died of boredom. Then you wipe them down with a damp rag and something that once smelled like lemon but now mostly smells like sadness. The floors are next. They're wood technically, but they've been scrubbed so often with lye and elbow grease that they're more grey than brown. You sprinkle the floors with damp tea leaves before sweeping an old trick to keep the dust from swirling into the air. It works just well enough that you keep doing it, though every so often a child slips and blames the tea leaves, and then you get blamed for not mopping. Oh yes, mopping. You do that with a rag and a bucket. The mop broke last month and you haven't had the coin to replace it. You scrub on hands and knees like your grandmother did. She always said, if the floor doesn't reflect your face, you've missed a spot. But you suspect she was slightly mad by the end. Maybe the lye fumes did it. The furniture is next. There's a sideboard with a doily that hasn't been white since the coronation. You beat the dust out of the upholstery with a stick and a prayer. You polish the wooden bits with beeswax and more breadcrumbs, yes again. They work well on smudges, supposedly. You're starting to think the Victorians just hated wasting anything, even failure. At some point you break for tea, which is just hot water with a leaf in it. Sugar if you're lucky. Milk if the cow didn't kick over the pail again. You drink it standing up, staring out the window. The neighbour across the alley is beating a rug like it insulted her. You nod in solidarity. There's a child tugging on your skirt. They want bread. You offer them the ends of the loaf, the ones too hard for chewing but perfect for scrubbing the baseboards. They're unimpressed. You promise to save them a spoonful of stew if there's any left. You both know there won't be, but lies are a mother's privilege. Now it's time for the laundry. Don't get excited. It's not laundry like you know it. It's a punishment disguised as domestic duty. You haul water from the pump outside. It's cold and your hands go numb by the third bucket. You boil the water with soap shavings and a smile that doesn't reach your eyes. The linens go in first, then the shirts, then the mystery stains you don't want to name out loud. You agitate the clothes with a stick. You rinse them twice. You wring them out by hand until your wrists feel like they might never forgive you. You hang them on a line and hope the pigeons show mercy. They never do. By noon, you've done the morning round. The house smells faintly cleaner, though still mostly like boiled onions. You sit for a moment on a wobbly chair, your apron dusted with flour and regret. There are 6 more hours of cleaning ahead, but for now you breathe. You earned this breath. The chair creaks beneath you, though. To be fair, it creaks under everyone. It's not so much a chair as it is a tired arrangement of splinters still clinging to one another out of obligation. You close your eyes for just a moment. But the peace is short-lived. There's always something else waiting. And right now that something is the parlour. Ah, yes, the parlour. The room no one uses except when someone dies, or when a guest visits, which is to say almost never. But it still must be spotless, because appearances matter even in a house where the ceiling leaks and the dog has fleas. The parlour is where your respectability lives, or at least pretends to, and God help you if a neighbour pops in and finds dust on the mantel. You begin with the curtains. They're heavy grim, and haven't been washed since Queen Victoria was still in mourning, which is to say ever. You beat them senseless with a broom handle, sending up clouds of dust so thick they might qualify as weather. One puff hits you in the face, and you cough like you've smoked a chimney. Somewhere someone surely once said this counts as cardio. Next are the ornaments. Porcelain figurines of shepherdesses who never touched a sheep. Glass vases always too fragile to hold water. You dust each one like it's a relic, even though you secretly wish they'd all fall off the shelf just to save time. One has a chipped nose. You rotate it so no one sees. That's what cleaning is half the time, strategic misdirection. The carpet, of course, cannot be washed. It must be swept vigorously, and then knelt upon for crumb detail. You crawl along the edges like a Victorian detective hunting for clues. Only your suspects are biscuit fragments and you have no Watson to assist. Here's where the breadcrumb cleaning returns. For darker rugs, the stale white crumbs show dirt when you sweep them up again. It's backwards logic, but it works well enough that generations of women swore by it. Historians still argue whether this method was truly effective or just another example of Victorian domestic mythology. But effectiveness is beside the point. It kept people busy. And in this world, busyness is next to godliness. You finish the parlour with a dry cloth wipe of the piano. It doesn't play anymore, but it sits with the solemnity of something important. Your eldest once tried to learn a hymn on it before the tuning went entirely. Now it's just a furniture piece that smells faintly of neglect and lemon oil. Next is the hallway. People think hallways are simple. They are not. They collect everything: mud, soot, lost buttons, and the dreams of people too tired to make it to their bedrooms. You sweep slowly, checking for errant pins or half-chewed ends of string. You find a sock. You don't remember whose. You tuck it into your pocket like some sort of sad laundry magpie. And now, because the universe demands variety, it's time to polish the brass. The doorknob's drawer handles candlesticks. All of it has to shine. Not sparkle necessarily, but gleam faintly under the oil lamp like it's still trying. You dip a rag into a paste of vinegar and flour. It stinks. It always stinks. But it does the job. You rub in circles, not because it helps more, but because it makes you feel like something's being accomplished. That's half of housework, the illusion of progress. Like fighting a tide with a thimble and telling yourself the shoreline looks slightly better. Someone knocks at the back door. It's the coal man. He doesn't say much. He drops off 2 sacks which you pay for with a grimace and a few too many coins. Then he's gone again like a grumpy Santa who only brings dust. You drag the sacks into the cellar, coughing the entire way. Coal dust gets into your clothes, your eyes, your soul. You'll be shaking it out of the drapes for a week. You check the pantry next. It's half empty and half unidentifiable. A sack of flour that's more lump than grain. Some potatoes doing a fair impression of shriveled goblins. A turnip that might have once been optimistic. You do some mental arithmetic, the kind that involves stew optimism and hunger. Dinner tonight will be thin, but there'll be something. Hopefully no one asks what. The table needs wiping. Again. There's always a spot. Always a crumb. You've wiped this surface so often you could probably trace it blindfolded. You retuck the corner of the tablecloth, hand-sewn, patched 5 times, and still refusing to lay flat. You stare at it for a moment, wondering whether anyone else sees how much effort goes into being invisible. Probably not. You pass by the mirror in the hallway. Not on purpose. It just happens. You barely recognize the reflection. There's flour in your hair, a streak of soot on your cheek, and a look of mild disbelief like you're surprised it's only noon. You smile faintly, only out of politeness. Then come the stairs. These are the devil's playground. Each step creaks differently. You've memorized the symphony of their complaints. Dust gathers here more stubbornly as though it's trying to hide. You bend down, brush in hand, and clean each riser like you're preparing it for royalty. Though of course no one regal will ever walk these stairs. Only you, over and over again. Upstairs you open windows to air out the bedrooms. The breeze carries in cold and the faint promise of rain. Perfect. You straighten beds that were never truly unmade fluff pillows that have never known fluff, and smooth sheets that still smell faintly of last week's washing day. One child's toy lies abandoned on the floor, a wooden horse missing a leg. You move it to the shelf because somehow that makes it whole again. You pause in the doorway of the nursery. The wallpaper is peeling a little more each week. The rocking chair sits still. You think about sitting but don't. The moment passes. There's always something more. You make your way back downstairs, your legs feeling heavier than they ought to. Your hands are raw, your nails worn to dull nubs, and there's a blister threatening to become a character of its own. Still, the house is quieter now, calmer. The dust has settled. The brass has gleamed, the crumbs have been both tool and enemy. You boil water again, not for tea, just for the comfort of steam. As it hisses softly on the range, you rest your elbows on the counter and let the warmth rise into your face. There's more to do. There's always more to do. But for a moment the world is still. You don't get to rest long. Because next comes laundry. Laundry in the Victorian sense is not so much a chore as it is a multi-day saga, part Greek tragedy, part endurance sport. And today, it's your turn at the washtub. You begin as all good stories do, with a sigh and a pile of damp, questionably stained linens. Sheets, chemises, bloomers, socks, collars, aprons somehow multiplied like rabbits over the course of a week. And not one of them clean. You start by hauling water from the pump, which groans like it resents your request. The handle sticks, the metal bites your hand, and the water, when it finally arrives, is cold enough to stun a walrus. You drag the bucket back inside, then another and another, because laundry doesn't ask for politeness. It demands gallons. The copper boiler gets lit. You feed it kindling and coax the flames to life. It takes a while. Everything takes a while. As the water begins to heat, you sort the garments like a battlefield. Medic whites here, darks there, delicates treated like royalty. But nothing stays delicate for long. Soap is not the kind you'd find in a fragrant shop. It's homemade, mostly lard and lye, harsh enough to strip paint and possibly memories. It smells like duty and forgotten dreams. You chip off hunks and toss them into the water where they melt reluctantly. In go the clothes, and the scrubbing begins. You bend over the washtub like a penitent monk. Your knuckles ache almost immediately. The washboard is unforgiving. So are the stains. Mud coal, something that might be gravy. Or blood. It's best not to ask. You scrub anyway. Not because you believe you'll win, but because the ritual matters. At some point a child pokes their head in and offers to help. You wave them off. This is not a job for children, it's barely a job for adults. Besides, they'll only get in the way and likely soak the floor in the process. And you just cleaned that. When the whites are clean, or at least cleaner, you rinse them in cold water that numbs your arms to the elbow. Then comes wringing. You twist each piece until it weeps your wrists screaming with the effort. You hang them on the line in the backyard, the wind snapping the sheets like sails. Then the darks. Same story, new victims. The water now resembles soup made from despair, but it's progress. You tell yourself this as your back begins to protest and the floor around the washtub becomes a hazard zone of splashes and soap. Delicates are last. They're not delicate, of course, just smaller and more prone to shrinking into doll clothing. You dip them gently as if pretending they were born into a better life. You pat them, rinse them, hang them in the patch of sun that warms the side of the house for 20 minutes a day. By now the fire has died down. The water is tepid. You sit on the stoop for a breath. You can see the steam rising from the clothesline dancing in the chill morning air. It's oddly pretty, like the house is exhaling. Historians still debate whether Victorian laundering methods were truly more effective than modern ones, or just dramatically more exhausting. Some argue the soap was better, others claim it was the sheer volume of elbow grease. You have no opinion. You just know your hands feel like they've aged 50 years in one morning. You carry the rinse bucket to the garden. Waste not, want not. The soapy water might discourage weeds or angry spirits, or at least give the parsley something to complain about. You dump it out with a splash and the earth sighs in response. Then, as if summoned, the iron cools. Not a modern iron, of course. Yours is cast iron heated on the stove handled with a rag because it would sear your skin otherwise. It holds heat like a grudge and weighs as much as a sleepy badger. You test it with a spatter of water. It hisses ready. You fetch the driest pieces, mostly collars and aprons. These must be starched crisp, perfect. You iron them with care, pressing out wrinkles and inexpectations. There is something almost meditative about it. The hiss, the weight, the rhythm, then the scorched smell snaps you out of it. One apron bears a dark mark now. You turn it inside out. Strategic ironing. A few birds chatter outside, probably mocking you. You consider joining them just for the novelty of conversation without expectations. But the wind picks up and the bedsheets try to escape the line. You chase them with a peg in your teeth, flapping like a domestic scarecrow. Laundry day stretches on. The sun moves across the sky like it's taunting you. You fetch the dry pieces, fold them with ceremonial precision. Underwear stacked, shirts aligned, socks tucked inside each other like sleepy twins. It's strangely satisfying, but folding is not the end. No, now comes the airing of the drawers. Not the undergarments, the actual wooden drawers. You pull them from the dresser, wipe them out with vinegar and old newspapers and line them with lavender sprigs. You don't know if it actually keeps moths away, but it smells like you've made an effort. And that's half the battle. You place each folded piece into its rightful home. There's a strange pleasure in it, like organising chaos. Everything has a place, even if that place is cramped and smells faintly of starch and defeat. As you finish, you catch a glimpse of your reflection again. This time there's more soap in your hair than you'd like, a streak of soot down your neck, but your posture is a little straighter, maybe because the house is for a fleeting moment clean. You pour yourself the dregs of cold tea. Sit. Breathe. The world doesn't notice your work, but the silence feels like thanks. By now you might be thinking that after cleaning the house top to bottom and wrestling the laundry into submission, you'd finally get a rest. A quiet moment with a teacup perhaps, or a bit of embroidery by the window. But no, because it's cooking day. And in a Victorian household, especially one without servants, cooking isn't a matter of following a recipe. It's a performance. A multi-act play involving smoke splatter and several pots that never quite get clean. You begin with the fire, always the fire. It has to be coaxed, not demanded. You lay the kindling just so, feed it with confidence, and whisper a promise to the gods of combustion. With luck, the stove catches without too much smoke. With bad luck, your eyebrows may not survive. You learn to listen to the language of the flame, the way it crackles or hesitates, the smell of too much coal, or not enough. This is the prelude to your entire day. The range is cast iron, the kind that radiates heat long after you've stopped needing it. The oven temperature isn't adjustable, it's a suggestion, not a setting. You stick your hand in, judge the heat by instinct and hope. There's no timer, the clock is your nose. You burn a few things learning the rules, or more accurately learning that the rules are different every day. Today's goal is a hearty midday meal, boiled beef potatoes and a pudding that will wobble alarmingly, but comfort the family into thinking everything's fine. You fetch the beef from the larder. It's been hanging long enough to be tender, hopefully. The butcher said it was fresh, but the smell is doing a lot of talking and not all of it friendly. Still, you trim off the questionable parts, toss them to the cat and move on. Into the pot it goes along with an onion, a bay leaf, a prayer. It'll simmer for hours, you just need to keep it company. The potatoes need peeling. You settle into a rhythm, scrape, turn, scrape. Your hands work automatically while your mind wanders. Potatoes are one of the few things you can count on. They don't judge. They don't spoil too fast. They don't require 16 sauces to be edible. You mash them later with a bit of milk and lard if you have any. Butter is for the rich or the reckless. You once tried to be fancy and used a whole pat. The guilt still lingers, and the butter never quite recovered from the scandal. Now the pudding. It's not dessert. Victorian puddings are dense, savoury creatures closer to dumplings than sponge cake. You mix suet flour and shredded vegetables, maybe a chopped kidney if you're brave. The texture is questionable, the taste uncertain, but it fills the stomach. That's the point. You tie the pudding in a cloth and drop it into a boiling pan like a message in a bottle. Your hopes for dinner sealed inside. While everything bubbles, you check the bread. You baked it yesterday, or was it 3 days ago? No matter. You knock on it to test freshness. It thuds back. Acceptable. You slice it thick, butter it thinly if there's butter. If not, dripping will do, or jam, or nothing. A knock at the back door, likely the neighbour. She wants to borrow something, which means you'll get it back next week with a lecture about her rheumatism. Still, you give her what she needs, flour, probably. She leaves with a sigh. You wonder if she's already eaten today. Historians still argue whether Victorian meals were more nutritious than modern ones, or simply more filling. Some point to the lack of preservatives. Others note that half of dinner was just boiled into oblivion. Either way, you're not cooking for nutrition. You're cooking to survive, and to be seen doing so. Heaven help you if the family returns and finds the house not smelling like effort. While the beef cooks, you tend to the pantry. Victorian pantries are temperamental places, half storage, half science experiment. You scan the jars, pickled onions, preserved pears, rhubarb chutney, a questionable bottle labelled simply relish. You wipe the shelves with a vinegar cloth. Mice have been nibbling again. You toss a bit of poison down. The humane kind, supposedly. You hum a hymn while you do it. Just in case, the pudding is ready to be removed. You lift it out, dripping, steaming alien in its cloth. You untie it like a gift you're not sure you want. It slumps onto the plate with a noise like resignation. Still, it holds its shape. That's a win. You garnish it with a sprig of something green and convincing parsley, maybe. You slice the beef. It's beef-like. A bit stringy, but tender enough. You arrange it on a platter with the potatoes and pudding and call the meal done. The plates are chipped. The silver is mostly tin, but the table is set. There's a satisfaction in presentation even when everything leans slightly to one side. You hear boots at the front door, the family's returned, children thunder in like miniature cyclones. Your husband grunts hello, wipes his hands on his trousers. You ladle out food one plate at a time. Nobody thanks you, nobody has to. The thanks is in the chewing. You sit last. You always sit last. By the time you do, the beef is cold, the potatoes have gone gluey, and the pudding leans like it's trying to leave. But you eat it anyway, because this is life. Warm food, full bellies, a moment of silence. You allow yourself to enjoy it. Conversation is light. The children recount their day mud lessons, a pigeon that looked suspicious. Your husband says the factory is hiring again. You pretend not to feel hopeful. Hope is an expensive emotion, one you've learned to ration like everything else. After the plates are cleared, you scrape them into the slop bucket. Nothing is wasted. Even bones go to the dog, and if the marrow is good, you save it. The dishes wait in the tin basin. You stare at them like they've wronged you personally, but you wash them anyway, one by one, with soap you made yourself and a brush that's seen better decades. The kitchen quiets. The stove cools. You wipe down the table, sweep the crumbs into your palm and scatter them for the birds outside. They peck greedily, unaware they're cleaning up your day. You watch them and feel oddly not alone. And then as the light fades and the cold creeps in, you lean on the windowsill for just a moment. You let yourself feel tired. You let the silence hold you. Because tomorrow you'll do it all again. And strangely, that's enough. You step outside into the grey drizzle of mid-morning, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Victorian kitchens often had an attached yard or garden, and in your case, attached means a patch of mud, a crooked fence, and 2 overstuffed outbuildings that haven't been painted since the Duke's coronation. But this is where part 2 of your daily campaign unfolds, tending the outbuildings and garden chores. Your first stop is the chicken coop. No clucking grand visions here, just half a dozen hen's feathers, dull eyes gleaming with suspicion, and a rooster who regards you as his sworn enemy. You thrust open the coop door and scoff as a rain-soaked hen flutters against your bonnet. You've no time for apologies. Grimy nests await. Using a short-handled spade, you scrape out yesterday's bedding, a mixture of straw droppings and the occasional lost thimble in one quick motion. Don't think about the thimble. You dump the foul mash into a wheelbarrow which was once painted green but now reveals patches of rust and rot. You wheel the wheelbarrow to the compost heap located conveniently near the fence so that passing neighbours can gape at your domestic industriousness. As you empty the muck, you pause to watch earthworms wriggle back into the soil. Composting was practically unheard of then, but you know it nourishes the garden better than any guano. Next, the water pump. You're no stranger to hauling water, but the pump in the yard has a mind of its own. You wrap your hands around the handle, bare chapped hands, and pull. The metal shudders. You push and water sputters out. When it finally flows in a steady stream, you catch it in the same bucket you use for laundry rinse off the spade and refill the watering can. You plan to douse the parched beans planted last spring. The drought nearly finished them off last week. You pour water carefully at the base of each stalk, listening to the gentle drip-drip as the soil welcomes relief. Garden beds in Victorian times were as much for show as sustenance. Yours bear a few carrots, some kale and herbs squeezed into a tiny border parsley sage thyme. You pinch off yellowed leaves, mindful not to uproot anything. The smell of wet mint rises as you rub a leaf between your fingers. One of the domestic manuals suggested rubbing mint on doorposts to ward off bad air or miasma, though modern thinkers now debate whether it did anything beyond scent the hallway. You move to the pigsty, which is surprisingly large given your single pig named Hamilton. Hamilton is a plump creature with an uncanny knack for mud baths. The pen is slick with yesterday's mud. You grasp a long-handled rake and slowly break up the sludge. The pig grunts his approval, nosing you for treats. You toss in some carrot peelings and watch him root them greedily. If you ever need an ally, it's Hamilton, one pig to rule them all. Cleaning the pigsty also means repairing the fence. One slat leans at a suspicious angle after a particularly enthusiastic rooting session. You unscrew a loose hinge with a screwdriver that arrived in last week's shipment from town, tighten the screw until your wrist aches, then test the slat. It stands firm. You breathe out. Victory is small but vital. Your final chore outside is gathering herbs. You carry a basket past the coop to a small herb bed. Rosemary, lavender and chamomile bow slightly under raindrops. You pinch sprigs of lavender and chamomile, intending to dry them indoors for sachets. Victorian women swore sachets stashed in linen drawers, kept linens fresh and moths at bay. A few sprigs of lavender go behind your ear. Not for fashion, but for comfort. The scent is calming, like a lullaby for the nerves. As you head back to the house basket in hand, you pass the tool shed. Its door squeaks ominously. Inside are your spade rake hoe and a curious gadget your uncle once brought back from India, a small brass contraption said to measure soil acidity. It doesn't work anymore. You tap it and it rattles pathetically. You suspect it was more novelty than necessity. Still, you leave it on the shelf. After all, accessories are important. By the time you cross the threshold, mud encrusted on your boots and herbs pressed to your damp skirt, the house smells faintly of lavender and sweetness. It's a small improvement over yesterday's ash. Inside, you empty the watering can into the sink, then lay the herbs on a rack above the hearth for drying. The pig's offerings go to the compost pile again, where you mix with the chicken coop remnants in a layered heap. Outside the garden beds stand slightly revived, their soil darker and more welcoming. You pause in the hallway, hands on hips, and survey your day's work. The coop is clean, the pigsty repaired, the herbs gathered, the garden watered. You imagine a modern tool, an electric hedge trimmer perhaps, and shudder at the thought. There's something reassuring about the slow physical labour of it all. This is your domain. Your husband wanders by, curious about the dampness on your skirt. You nod to the basket of herbs and the slightly cleaner yard. He grunts. No words are necessary. He knows you've been outside because you smell of earth and damp. The children peer at the herbs with mild interest, asking if they can help make tea later. You nod. Perhaps you'll teach them tomorrow once they're back from school. For now, you head toward the kitchen to warm that fire and prepare for afternoon chores. The work never stops, but you've earned this moment of transition, yard to hearth, outside to inside, mud to soot. And though your back aches and your hands are scratchy, you feel quietly triumphant. You've moved the boundary of civilization another inch earthward. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. You return to the kitchen, dripping herbs onto the hearth rack, and realise it's already past midday. Victorian housewives rarely sat down for more than a few minutes without feeling guilty, so you shake off the temptation of a quiet moment. There's schooling to supervise, errands to run, and the ledgers to reconcile. Welcome to the world of domestic administration. First, the children. They tumble in from school, muddy boots squeaking on the scullery floor. You shepherd them into the parlour where a small alphabet board awaits propped on the piano bench. Victorian education for girls and boys was separate, but in your modest home there's no room for distinctions. Both learn the 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic. Though writing usually means copying moral maxims like order is heaven's first law, until the quill pen cuts into your fingers. You settle them at a small table and pass out slates and chalk. The elder struggles with fractions, her brow furrowed. You kneel beside her and explain that half a penny plus a farthing makes 3 farthings an essential lesson if she ever plans to shop at the grocer's. Historians still argue whether Victorian arithmetic curricula prepared children for real life or simply trained them to keep shop so-so books. But in your house it's more important than diapers or dinners, at least in theory. While they work, you fetch the ledger. In a small notebook, no double entry for you, the day's expenses are recorded: cauliflower, candles, medicine. You write everything in neat copper plate, though your hand shakes by the 3rd line. You tally the sums in your head: 22 pence for meat, 6 pence for candles, 9 pence for school fees. You're balanced just barely. A miscalculation here could mean no tea tomorrow. You press the quill harder against the page and wonder when you'll ever be more than a tightrope walker balancing ink and obligation. Next, errands. You bundle up the younger child in a wool cloak that smells of mothballs and head into the drizzle for the weekly trip to the grocer and apothecary. On the street, cobblestones glisten with rain. Horse-drawn carts clatter by their wheels, spraying muddy water. You dodge puddles, clutching your shopping bag and hoping the cloak's hood holds. The grocer's shop is cramped. Shelves stacked with barrels of salted fish, sacks of grains and glass jars of spices. You ask for a pound of currants, a quarter pound of cheap sugar and a small loaf of breadcrumbs, business as usual. The grocer chats about the market prices, which have risen again. You nod sympathetically, though you know sympathetic nods don't lower the cost of sugar. Outside at the apothecary, you hand over a worn slip of paper with your latest prescription castor oil, for the baby's constipation laudanum for your mother's rheumatism, and a bottle of camphorated oil to keep away chills and bad air. You pay in small coins and slip the vials into your bag, half expecting them to rattle loose on the walk home. Back at the house, you parcel out the currants into the pudding mixture for tomorrow's dessert and taste a single berry that slips into your mouth by accident. It's sharp and sweet, an unexpected luxury. You tuck the rest into a sealed jar, hoping it stays preserved until Sunday. Now the baby needs attention. Feedings are timed like clockwork, every 4 hours more or less. You mix formula at just the right temperature, testing a drop on your wrist. The infant sucks content. You gaze at tiny fingers curling around the edge of the basin. A mainstream fact Victorian mothers often practiced. Extended breastfeeding, sometimes lasting 3 years, believed to strengthen the child's constitution. But in your household, milk is rationed, so formula supplements reality. As the baby drifts to sleep, you clear the table and begin the afternoon's household chores, sweeping, polishing and reorganizing. You find a rhetorical comfort in cementing order for a few quiet hours before supper. Dusting a bookshelf, you uncover an old photograph of your grandmother at her wedding, corseted, radiant and smiling. You trace her face with a fingertip, remembering stories of her strength during hard times. A fringe tidbit, your grandmother once ran the household solo for a month when your grandfather fell ill, managing servants' accounts and social calls with unfailing calm. Next is the inkstand. You wipe the brass inkwell and refill it with ink ground from soot and gum arabic, no bottled convenience here. The pens are quills and you must trim each one to keep it sharp. A brief scholarly debate, some suggest that the quill's flexibility allowed finer scripts while others claim metal nibs were more reliable. You've tried both. Neither suits an unpracticed hand. The children's schoolwork intersects once more as you quiz them on geography, naming rivers and mountains from textbooks without illustrations. They struggle, fumbling Latin pronunciations. You sympathise. Even you have trouble with Aegean. Still they earn a ribbon for diligence. You tuck it into the ledger as a memento. Now comes the hardest part, polishing the silver. Tea service cutlery, candlesticks, the lot. You smear paste on each piece, rub, rinse, dry, buff. The faint, acrid smell of ammonia mingles with dust in your nostrils. Silver polishing is a famous Victorian pastime demonstrative of gentility and moral rectitude. A study from 1892 suggested that regular polishing improved household morale by providing visible evidence of a lady's care. You sometimes wonder whether it also improved the silver. At last, as shadows lengthen, you settle the children for their supper, a simple gruel with breadcrumbs stirred in for texture. They eat quietly, sleepily as the fire crackles. You tuck them in, pressing a whisper to their flushed cheeks. You lie about your day, of course, no mention of inky fingers or soapy rags. They nod, half aware, then close their eyes. Finally, the ledger. You finish your tallies, coal provisions, medicine school fees, the cost of caring for the chicken coop and the pigsty. You note tomorrow's errands and estimate the week's budget. You close the book with a soft snap, then lean back and exhale a long breath. The house is quiet now. only the ticking clock and the distant drip of water from the eaves. You pour a small cup of tea cold dark with a slice of stale bread dunked in it. You sip, savouring the warmth, and as night falls you reflect on the day's tasks, education, finance errands, childcare, and the endless pursuit of order. You may never rise in society, never be celebrated in history, but you keep the world turning, one chore at a time. You awake to the muffled chime of the mantel clock in the parlour. It's Wednesday, the day for laundry smocks and dusting the bedrooms, though dusting in bedrooms never really ends, not until the walls themselves crumble. You swing your feet out of bed, pausing to steady yourself against the corset's relentless squeeze. It's the first battle of the day, liberating your lungs from steel and lace. A quick tug at the back laces and you gain precious extra inches of breath. The children are still asleep, except for the baby's soft gurgle echoing from the cradle. You pad down the hallway, barefoot skirt brushing the carpet toward the scullery, where the first pot of water simmers. Breakfast is porridge again, the children's favourite, though favourite is relative. You stir in a spoonful of treacle for sweetness, but discretion keeps it to a thin glaze. Sugar is a luxury you ration like gold. As the porridge bubbles, you fetch brushes, cloths, and your secret weapon, a handful of breadcrumbs reserved from yesterday's loaf. Bedrooms demand a lighter touch than parlours. Wallpaper here is water-sensitive fabric based in some homes, and your humble cottage proudly boasts simple paper printed with tiny roses. You test the crumb on a scrap leftover behind the wardrobe. It scoops up fine dust without peeling the paper. You nod satisfied. First stop the master bedroom. You sweep the floorboards with a goose-down duster, raising a gentle cloud that settles like mist before you kneel for the skirting boards. You rub vinegar on a rag, then wipe the boards, following with the breadcrumb trick to lift stubborn smudges. With each sweep and press, the room brightens. Light from the single sash window now illuminates wood that glows faintly, no longer dull with grime. Next, the bed. Linen sheets are stripped and piled on the chair, blankets folded and stacked neatly. You fluff pillows, feather-filled, surprisingly resilient, and tuck the mattress corners with military precision. Bed-making is an art, they say. Ireland's linen trade swore by stiff mattress corners. You know guests might never peek behind the bed curtains, yet the ritual persists. Upstairs door creaks as you enter the children's room. Small beds line the walls, each with a handful of toys placed just so a wooden horse missing an ear. A rag doll with one eye, a battered ball. You straighten them as if officers at parade. Then dust each surface, little chairs, toy chests, the windowsill where scribbled love notes often appear in chalk. History books argue whether children's rooms were ever truly private. In your home, secrets hide everywhere, under beds, between floorboards, in the creases of quilts. You wipe down the window frame and prune the view with a rag. The glass isn't clear but clean. Outside, the alley of terraced houses stretches in endless repetition. You pause, imagining life there for housewives who rose even earlier. You give yourself a small nod solidarity in the sisterhood of soot. The little one wakes eyes glassy with sleep. You lift her gently and brush lullaby words in her ear, rhymes you barely recall passed down like heirlooms. She clings to your neck, leaving tufts of hair in her grip. You rock her crumb-dusted rag in one hand, smoothing the rug with the other, to keep stray threads from tangling her toes. Breakfast plates clatter in the scullery. Children descend with yawns and scraped knees. You ladle porridge into bowls, each measured portion, not a grain wasted, and watch them eat in silence. Porridge here is more than food. It's a testament to survival. Roots, grains, milk if you're lucky. It fuels futures you can't yet glimpse. While they eat, you check the silverware. Forks and spoons cleaned twice this week still bear faint tarnish. Wednesday is silver polishing day, they say, and you obey the schedule. You smear a paste of whiting and vinegar on each piece, let it sit, then buff until the metal gleams. The effort feels pointless, no one admires forks, but routine anchors you. After breakfast, the children head back to lessons. You station them at the parlour table quills poised over copybooks. Their recitations drift through the hall like distant birdsong. Etiquette, you remind them. Mind your manners. But their elbows slip ink spills and you laugh a rare sound. It surprises them more than it pleases. Now you tackle the laundry chest. Yesterday's herbs are fragrant but limp. You rewrap them in clean cloth and tie with ribbon lavender sage chamomile. These sachets will join pillows, linen drawers and wardrobes, scenting each corner against moth's guilt or stale living. Next, you gather linens for Wednesday's wash. Starched collars demand special attention. You fill a bowl with warm water, dissolve powdered flour starch until it's milky, then dip the collars. You smooth them flat, pin them on a board, wait as the sunlight through the window dries them crisp. Collars here are badges of decorum, a perpetually white frame for your face. Midday draws near and chores converge. You refill the coal scuttle, break apart lumps, let fresh pieces scatter like black gems. A mainstream fact coal heating was the Victorian triumph and curse, radiant warmth obscured by choking smoke. You've learned to live between flame and dust. You empty chamber pots from night before rinse, and sanitize them with ashes and vinegar, primitive but effective. The hall floor feels sticky afterward, but you scrub with a brush until the wood tells you it's clean. No one needs to know your soul is stickier. You pass the guest chamber, a room rarely used but meticulously maintained. You fluff the spare blanket, dust the nightstand, and refill the water carafe. It's all in place, bed pulled tight curtains, straight chamber pot hidden. The room breathes possibility, if only for strangers who never arrive. Your own chamber beckons. It's simple: a bed, a small dresser, a single chair. You dust the dresser, rearrange your few personal items, brooch locket letters tied with ribbon. You polish the mirror frame with breadcrumbs, marvelling at the irony of using stale food on silvered glass. A knock at the front door jolts you. It's the parish matron here to inspect your abode for health and morals. You greet her with a stiff curtsy corset, permitting, and invite her in with a polite nod. She glances at your work-polished hooks, fluffed sheets, breadcrumb-cleaned surfaces. She nods approvingly, jots a note in her book and leaves. You exhale. Somewhere between you and her ledger you passed. Afternoon wanes. You tally tasks complete and those pending. Dust in the study will wait for Thursday. Curtains in the dining room for Friday. You allow yourself a moment's pride. The household lives by your schedule, and for now it survives by it. As dusk approaches, you gather candles dipped in tallow last week and station them in holders. Light flickers against walls, shadows lengthen, and the house feels alive in a new way. You've scrubbed, dusted, polished, and fended off chaos once more. You sink onto your own bed for a heartbeat, corset loosened, feet aching. You breathe fully, chest rising in protest. No one sees this moment, but it's yours. The house is quiet, the children safe, the world still turning. Tomorrow you'll begin again, more chores, more rituals, more crumbs. Yet tonight you rest in the brief glow of success. For in a Victorian world defined by order, your hands have carved out a sanctuary. Morning light slips through the bedroom curtains like a quiet apology, and you rise with it, steady, determined. Today is Thursday, the day for deep cleaning in small corners no one notices until they're spotless. Thursday is behind the furniture day, and in a Victorian house that means reenacting dust ballet in spaces spiders forgot. You tie your apron, brown cotton patched in 3 places, and pause before the bureau. Under it is a kingdom of lost odds and ends, broken thimbles, stray buttons, a single glove with no match, and the dust of decades. You kneel, pushing against the corset's grip, and shine a small lantern borrowed from the hall. The light trembles over motes floating like lazy fireflies. First the bureau's underside. You brush gently with a goose-down duster, coaxing cobwebs loose, without disturbing hidden treasures. A long drop brush follows, capturing dust that's settled in the grain cracks. Each pass yields a soft cloud. The bureau is walnut polished once by grandfather's hand. You wipe with a vinegar and oil mixture, then buff with a soft rag. The wood glows. In these hidden places, the sheen of craftsmanship is almost sacred. Next, the wainscoting along the hallway. The narrow panels were once crisp white. Now they're dimmed by smoke and time. You have to lean sideways, one hand pressed against the wall for balance, breadcrumb rag in the other, pausing only to steady your breathing. You press crumbs into the grooves, drawing out grime like a chemist coaxing a potion. Historians still argue whether breadcrumb cleaning was widespread among the working classes, or solely a parlour trick of the gentry. You've never seen it elsewhere, but in your home it reigns supreme. Moving on, you inspect the fireplace trim in the sitting room, a delicate pattern of carved roses. You follow each petal with a small artist's brush, dislodging soot. The brush must remain dry. Any moisture would dull the finish. A stiff bristled toothbrush helps reach crevices. It's painstaking but oddly meditative, the rhythm of bristles against wood. You pause jar in hand and consider the jar's own hidden filth. The lid's spiral threads always collecting dust. You unscrew it slowly so as not to fling crumbs and wipe it inside and out with a lint-free cloth. Every surface deserves attention. Then comes the skirting board in the dining room behind the high-back chairs. You wheel each chair aside, thunk-thump, cursing its weight. Victorian chairs were built for grandeur, not manoeuvrability. You wriggle behind them, breadcrumb rag at the ready, scraping along the baseboard until your hands burn. The chairs go back in place with a scrape, and you marvel that no one sees what the chairs hide by day. Under the sideboard is next. You stoop hook against the tablecloth and find a half-eaten biscuit from last week's tea. You retrieve it, wondering who forgot it. You polish the mahogany legs with a dollop of beeswax polish buff until they gleam. It's as much ceremony as cleaning a ritual honour to the furniture's service. In the corner sits an old coal scuttle, no longer in daily use but retained for show. You lift it onto a cloth to avoid scratching the floor, then empty a handful of coal dust that's gathered around its lip. You dust inside, replacing the scuttle carefully. The metal shines faintly like tired armour. A sudden cough from the next room draws you away. Child practice recitations. They're reviewing geography, name the rivers of England. You pause at the doorframe, finger on breadcrumb rag, and listen. The eldest stumbles over Thames, pronouncing it Teams, and you smile. They try again, and you slip back to your task, proud. Next is the chandelier in the dining room, a simpler design but dusty from dinners past. You climb the ladder again, foot cushion trembling. You remove each prism, clean it individually with warm water, and a drop of soap wipe dry, then replace. It's less dramatic than the grand chandelier upstairs, but no easier. One false move and glass shatters. You secure each prism with a dab of putty, ensuring they won't fall when dinner guests arrive, though these walls rarely hear dinner guests. You descend carefully and wipe the ladder's rungs before moving on. Tools must stay clean or they track dirt. The final challenge is the radiator fins in the sitting room iron pillars that heat the parlour in winter. You slide a thin brush between each column, coaxing out stiff dust. Victorian radiators were marvels of industrial design, but cleaning them is heartbreak. You press the rag against each fin, then follow with a second rag to catch loosened dust. The floor beneath is littered. You sweep it into a dustpan and deposit it in a bag for disposal outside, where it won't settle back on your freshly cleaned floors. By late afternoon, you've crisscrossed 5 rooms, contorted yourself beneath furniture, and scrubbed details smaller than a fingernail. Your back is a chorus of protests. Your hands are pruny from cleaning solutions, yet the house is lighter, as if breathing easier. You pause by the staircase, hand on the banister. It glows unmarred by finger oil or dust. You trace your palm along the wood, feeling its warmth. You remember your mother telling you that a clean home was a legacy, a silent gift to those who follow. In these hidden corners, that legacy matters most. As evening approaches, you extinguish the lantern and open the windows, letting fresh air chase out stale dust. You close them again against the chill and draw the curtains. The hidden places of the house are now revealed in cleanliness, but remain hidden from view, preserved for quiet satisfaction. You join the family for supper, feet, aching spirits soaring no higher than the glimmering woodwork around you. They notice the shine on the bureau and the gleam of the baseboards. Compliments are brief. "Nicely done, dear. It's enough." Back in your chamber, you loosen the corset and sink onto the bed. The world turns softly outside. You close your eyes, knowing that tomorrow you'll sweep new corners, uncover new dust, and discover new reasons to celebrate the private victories of a well-kept home. Saturday arrives in a gentle yawn, the house still warm from yesterday's baking, and heavy with the scent of rising dough. You wake just as the sun peeks through the curtains, though peek is generous. Its light is pale and hesitant, like it knows you worked late. Today is the only day you pause, essentials only. No grand cleaning rituals, no dust expeditions behind furniture. Instead, you flow through softer tasks, tending to your own appearance, preparing for Sunday service, and finding small pockets of peace. First, you unlace the corset, easing its steel and bone away from your ribs. Your lungs sigh in relief. Victorian women endured corsets for decades, yet the moment of release feels almost revolutionary. Historians still argue whether corsets provided vital back support or merely perpetuated unnecessary discomfort. You neither confirm nor deny, you simply relish this tiny freedom. You step into your chamber and reach for a basin of warm water scented with lavender sprigs you dried last week. Dipping a soft cloth, you wash your face, the cool liquid sliding over skin scratched by yesterday's chores. You brush your hair, a knotty tangle of auburn waves, using a wooden brush with natural bristles. Each stroke loosens yesterday's dust and fatigue. You pause halfway through to admire your reflection. Your cheeks are flushed, eyes bright, and though the mirror glass is thin and slightly distorted, you see resilience. Next comes dressing for church. Sunday best is a modest lavender cotton gown trimmed with lace. You smooth it over your shoulders, buttoning the front with tiny polished buttons. You slip into woolen stockings and sturdy leather boots. You fasten a cameo at your throat, a keepsake from your grandmother. It's not flashy, but its carved profile reminds you of family strength. You tie a bonnet with a ribbon that matches the gown. Its wide brim shades your face from both sun and curious glances. Breakfast is simple, a slice of yesterday's bread lightly warmed spread with a whisper of butter and honey. You pair it with a cup of weak tea, no honey in this pot, but there's ginger beer in the pantry, fizzy and fresh. You pour a glass, delighting in the tiny bubbles tickling your tongue. Tavern recipes once claimed ginger beer cured everything from nausea to melancholy. Modern debate suggests the alcohol content was negligible, but the comfort undeniable. After breakfast, you gather the children for Sunday lessons, hymns and catechism. They practice Abide With Me around the piano, voices tentative. You stand beside them, guiding their breath and timing. The elder struggles with fast falls the eventide, pronouncing eventide like eventide instead of eventide, but you applaud effort, not perfection. The middle child recites the Lord's Prayer with solemn nods, lips shaping ancient words. You remind them that these verses are more than rote. They're the foundation of community and consolation. With lessons complete, you lay out Sunday linens on the parlour table, white damask with lace trim. You place polished silver candlesticks, each lit with a single taper, though no formal tea guests will arrive until tomorrow. It's about ritual preparing for the sacred, even in small ways. You light the hearth fire briefly to warm the room, then close the damper, leaving a gentle glow. Midday finds you in the pantry assembling a cold luncheon to pack for church fellowship. Cold joints of beef, slices of cheese, crusty bread, pickled vegetables and fruit preserves. You arrange them in a varnished wooden basket, line it with clean cloth and cover it. Many households hired servants to manage these details. You do them yourself, a statement of self-reliance that few remark upon, but you feel deeply. Outside, the crisp morning air carries a faint hymn from the nearby chapel. You pick up your umbrella, black sturdy with a carved wood handle, and bid the children follow. You walk together down the muddy lane, boots squelching bonnet brims casting soft shadows. The church stands modest but welcoming, its stone walls mottled by weather. Inside, sunbeams pierce coloured glass, painting the pews in muted reds and blues. You enter quietly, seating the family in a side pew. Hymn books crackle as the congregation rises. The organ begins its notes resonant. You sing along, voice blending with others. It feels like community woven from sound. A mainstream fact, Victorian church attendance was a cornerstone of social life, binding neighbours in shared ritual. Yet some modern scholars argue this habit reinforced social hierarchy more than spiritual kinship. You neither confirm nor dispute, you simply appreciate the collective breath of song. After service, there's fellowship in the parish hall. You unveil your basket, unpacking cold beef, cheese and bread. Neighbours greet you. Mrs. Aldridge compliments the day's bread. Mr. Thompson admires your neatly starched collar. You respond with humble thanks. Conversation drifts from weather to next week's harvest fair. Children chatter about games they'll play. You sip ginger beer, its fizz a gentle companion amid polite chatter. Returning home, you decide on small indulgences, a few pages of a borrowed novel, and a brief stroll in the front garden. You wander among the potted geraniums and tufts of rosemary, inhaling faint floral scents. Fringe-detailed geraniums were believed to repel insects and ward off bad spirits, though botanical studies deem them merely decorative. You smile at the superstition's charm. Afternoon sun is warm but not oppressive. You settle on the garden bench, novel open, but attention drifting. You watch a sparrow hop among the fence pickets. Peace is fragile here, vulnerable to chores that rise like tides, but today it holds steady. Before dusk, you remember the sourdough loaf proving in the coals of the now cold oven. You fetch it, slices crisp and crumbed. You serve supper early, cold meats, bread, marmalade, and a mug of tea. The children eat quickly, then head upstairs for baths, warm water mixed with lavender sprigs and gentle soap. They descend in nightgowns, clasped hands, and bright eyes. You tuck them in smoothing hair, whispering goodnight verses. They drift off beneath quilts you sewed last year, patterns still vibrant despite countless washings. Their breathing slows a steady rhythm. Back in the sitting room, you light a single candle and settle by the hearth with your novel. Pages turn softly. You pause occasionally, reflecting on a phrase, then continue. Outside, a distant church bell marks the hour 8 o'clock. Soon the world will hush. You close the book, lean back, and let the quiet settle over you. No chores await until tomorrow's rising, but the rest feels earned. You dip the candle snuffer, extinguish the flame, and step into the corridor. In your chamber, you undress more comfortably than any other day, corset off, gown loosened. You place the cameo back on its ribbon, hang your bonnet on the peg, and slip between fresh sheets. The lavender sachet whispers from the pillow. You breathe in the calm, the slight scent of rosemary and rose. In a world of relentless duties, Saturdays like this are brief reprieves, gentle islands in a sea of dust and duty. You close your eyes. Tomorrow chores resume, rhythms recommence. But for now, night is yours. The dawn arrives with a whisper, and Monday's tasks creep back into your mind even as the soft grey light fills the bedroom. You slide out of your nightclothes and into a simple working dress. No corset today, a self-granted mercy for your back. Mondays are for mending garments, repairing linens and sewing hidden tears, the undercurrent of invisible labours that keep your household intact. You gather the mending basket from behind the dressing table. Inside rests yesterday's patched stocking shirts with loose cuffs, and the bodice of your eldest daughter's school dress where a seam is split down the back. You set the basket on the sewing table, pull a lamp close and retrieve the seam ripper, a small tool of liberation and precise torture. First the daughter's dress. You slide the fabric into your lap and carefully unpick the damaged seam. Threads yield in soft resistance, revealing the raw edges. You press them flat against the table, smooth the panels, and thread the needle with thread matching the gown's deep navy. Each stitch is even neat, burying the flaw beneath disciplined craftsmanship. Victorian seamsters believed that a well-sewn seam was a mark of moral character, as though virtue could be measured in cotton and thread. Historians still argue whether this moral weight was real, or merely a social construct upheld by fashion magazines. You restitch the seam knot carefully inside the hem, and iron the repair with a small cool iron so as not to scorch the fabric. Next, the men's shirts. Your husband's collars fray at the corners, a common complaint in linen shirts stiffened with starch. You dampen the edges, pinch them between your nail and thumb to restore shape, then apply a fine line of starch paste folding each corner precisely. You press with the iron until crisp. Collars like this are society's first impression. A misaligned corner could suggest carelessness or worse. You replace the collars on their shirts and hang them on padded hangers, satin ribbons warning against creases. The stockings come next. Stocking knitting was once a cottage industry, but mass production changed everything. You mend runs with the Kitchener stitch, creating new loops, invisibly bridging holes. The wool is sturdy but thin, and your needle sometimes slips in embarrassment in the form of a wicked prickle. You curse softly and adjust your grip. Now the linens, tablecloths, napkins, sheets, they bear minor rips and holes from everyday wear. You patch them with cotton squares carefully cut to obscure tears. You sew in a lattice pattern echoing the original weave. One might call this invisible mending, but you prefer seamless restoration. You remember your grandmother's hands deft with needle and knot, keeping every scrap of cloth in service. A strand of piano music drifts in from the parlour. The eldest child practices scales C major ascending into the ether. You pause your stitching and listen, finger on thread. Music and mending, two arts requiring patience and precision. The piano is out of tune, but the notes are sincere, which matters more to you. Beside the sewing table is a small pile of uniforms belonging to the children's school. Each has a badge that needs replacing a tiny embroidered emblem of a book and quill. You secure new badges with hand stitches, reinforcing edges so they survive wash days, soap and lye. Uniforms demand order. Even today's debates over whether uniforms stifle individuality cannot erase their role in maintaining discipline and equality among students. By late morning, the basket is lighter. You pause to dip a rag in soapy water and wipe the table. The surface gleams, reflecting your work in double. There's a satisfaction in removing evidence of chaos so thoroughly that the chaos never seems to have existed. Outside the post arrives a letter from your sister in the neighbouring town. You break the seal and skim her words news of a new schoolhouse, a social gathering, perhaps a dress pattern you might borrow. Handwritten letters are treasures in this age before telephones became common. The mainstream fact is that England saw over 200,000 miles of telegraph lines by the 1870s, yet many rural homes still relied on the humbler crossbar. You tuck the letter into your apron, understanding the connection it brings even as you continue your solitary tasks. The afternoon brings a knock at the back door. It's the apothecary's assistant delivering a small parcel of herbs valerian for sleepless nights, peppermint for upset stomachs, and a curious jar of tarragon-infused vinegar touted as a cure for sore joints. Folk remedy or alchemical fad. Debates linger among medical circles of whether such tinctures held merit or merely placebo charm. You accept the parcel with a seat in the scullery, weighing future cures against present budgets. With the sewing done and letters read, you turn to the pantry. Monday is also restock day. You inventory sugar, flour, salt and dried peas. You weigh out portions, noting what must be reordered. Sugarloaf flour, just enough tea supply dwindling. You record it in the household memorandum book, each line a promise to remain afloat. There is a peculiar thrill in this accounting, a sense of control over destiny, measured in pounds and ounces. You pack a small sack for tomorrow's trip to market where you'll barter for fresh vegetables and exchange pleasantries with the grocer. The hearth needs tending too. You sprinkle fresh coals under the fire grate, coaxing the flames back to life. The fire crackles, smoke twirls up the chimney, and the kitchen warms. It's time for afternoon tea. Black tea brewed strong, a small slice of yesterday's loaf, toasted spread with jam. You sip and snack standing at the countertop, savouring the pause. Tea rituals in Victorian times were more than refreshment. They were social glue. Housewives gathered for tea time, sharing gossip, advice and invitations. You mull over whether to invite Mrs. Birchwood next week or perhaps host a small sewing circle on Wednesday evenings. Social calls demand planning even for the frugal household. By late afternoon, the children tumble home again, uniforms fresh from the laundry badges shining. They scatter about, dumping schoolbooks by the hearth. You greet them with warmth, inspecting their work stitches, neat seams strong. You reward them with small tokens, a new ribbon for hair, a piece of ginger beer ice. The day winds down as you pick up the mending basket one last time, now nearly empty. You tie off the final knot, tuck away needles and set the basket beside the bed. You glance around the bedrooms, tidier clothes, mended linens restored. Enough has been repaired to muddle through the week ahead. Dinner tonight is light vegetable stew with bread dumplings boiled in broth. You stir the pot taste for salt and add a pinch of herbs supplied this morning. The flavours meld into comfort. The children gather around the table again, plates steaming. You ladle soup with care, heart eased by the quiet routine. After supper, you light the lanterns and settle the family for a final hymn. The eldest strums the guitar, an instrument you acquired last year, while voices rise in gentle harmony. You hum along, eyes closing momentarily, imagining simpler days. And then as night embraces the house, you slip back into your chamber. You lay out tomorrow's apron, select a fresh spool of thread, and place the memoranda book on the shelf. You breathe deeply, the soft cadence of the hymn drifting from below. Tomorrow the cycle begins anew, dusting, cooking, gardening, mending. It is a tapestry woven from threads of care. You lie down, stitching restful thoughts into the fabric of your dreams. Sunday morning arrives with a crisp chill that seeps through the shutters. You rise quietly, mindful of sleepy children still nestled in their beds upstairs. Today is market day, the culmination of your weekly errands and the lifeline of your household. The market is a sensory tapestry, sight, sound, smell, all woven into a single experience that both invigorates and exhausts. After a quick breakfast of porridge and tea, you gather your linens and produce from the cellar. A wicker basket holds eggs, half a dozen still warm from mother hen, and a small bundle of fresh parsley snipped from the garden. You tuck into a cloth packet several slices of last week's cured bacon for barter or emergency rations. You lift the sourdough loaf from its resting place for sampling or supplement, and fasten your bonnet and shawl with practical precision. The walk to the market is brisk, a 20-minute trek along cobbled lanes lined with terraced houses. You pass neighbours emerging from church service, their Sunday best slightly rumpled but dignified. The main market square opens before you, like a stage stalls draped in faded tarpaulins, barrels of fresh fish glinting on ice, crates of apples, shining like treasure, and the aroma of fried dough, a luxury sold by vendors to passers-by. Your first stop is the poulterer. You present your eggs neatly cleaned and uniform in size. He inspects them, nods, and hands you a weighted apron of smoked sausages. These will provide protein for dinners this week. Poultry beyond eggs, and a modest chicken once a fortnight is a delicacy one your family savours on special occasions. The U-shaped sausage loops feel substantial in your basket. Next, the greengrocer. You select carrots bright orange despite the winter sun, and beetroot still speckled with soil which you know to wash and roast. You weigh the vegetables carefully. Root crops are staples, storing well through winter. You pass a debate in scholarly journals whether Victorian root sellers truly kept produce fresh, or whether many households simply endured gradual spoilage. You prefer to believe in the cellar's magic. Across the way, a fishmonger beckons with a glinting array of cod herring and mackerel. You choose 2 fresh herrings for a midday treat. The fishmonger fillets them with swift skill, and you pay with a handful of copper coins, pockets emptying even as you restock. You weave between stalls until you find the spice merchant a rare delight. Small jars of ground cinnamon cloves and mustard seed line a wooden chest. You purchase a pinch of cinnamon to stir into tomorrow's pudding, and a small pouch of mustard seed for pickling. Imported spices were once symbols of wealth. Now they're confessions of hope in a bland world. A fringe fact: mustard seeds fell under strict import regulations in the early 19th century, but by mid-century became accessible to middle-class kitchens. You tuck the mustard pouch into your apron as though carrying a secret. The final stop is the apothecary's stall, where medicinal herbs and elixirs are displayed in glass jars. You pick up chamomile blossoms necessary for calming nighttime teas, and a small vial of turpentine liniment for aches that flare on damp days. The apothecary, trained in pharmacy but not medicine, warns that turpentine is harsh on skin. You nod, knowing that remedies often came with side effects as potent as the cures themselves. All errands complete, you wrap your cloak tighter and begin the walk home. The basket feels heavier now, laden with sustenance and possibility. You pause at a bookstall, tempted by a cheap pamphlet of household tips. You resist. There are only so many minutes before chores beckon again. On the way back, you pass a group of street musicians playing a jaunty folk tune on fiddle and accordion. You drop a penny into the tin and smile at the children dancing in a muddy circle. Music and markets go hand in hand, 2 threads of community and celebration. Arriving home, you unload the basket in the kitchen. The children peer eagerly, voices rising in a happy clamour. You parcel out portions: herring fillets for lunch, carrots and beets, to roast later sausages for supper, and eggs set aside for tomorrow's breakfast. You label spice jars and replace them on the shelf, then secure the medicinal items in their cabinet. You wash and gut the fish at the scullery sink, filling bowls of cold water to rinse off scales. The smell is briny but fresh, a reminder of distant seas. You cook them for the children with a dash of pepper and a sprinkle of parsley. They eat with enthusiastic abandon. You smile, content that market day has borne fruit. In the afternoon, you store the weekend's provisions: vegetables in barrels, sausages in the cold pantry, dried eggs in a cool nook. You label each shelf with chalk and organisational flourish. You use more often than you'd admit. The pantry now stands as a testament to your market's success. Finally, the sourdough loaf. You slice it thick, testing the crumb. It's springy with a tang that lingers. You toast slices on the hearth, drip them with honey and sip herbal tea while the children play quietly in the corner. As night falls, you tally spending eggs for sausages, vegetables for stews, herring for lunches, spices for sweetening medicine for aches. The margin is slim, but margins exist. You close the ledger, replenish the quill's ink and tuck the book on its shelf. The house is full tonight. Laughter smells of cooking, the glow of lamplight. The market's bustle seems a world away. But within these walls, its gifts sustain you until next week's revival. You step into your chamber and hang your cloak to dry. Tomorrow is Sunday rest church service and a gentle pace. You unclasp your wristwatch, an heirloom, unreliable but sentimental, and place it on the nightstand. The market's rhythm slows until Monday. In bed, you hear the ticking clock, feel the lingering weight of Saturday's chores lift. You close your eyes, secure in the household's pulse. Market day is done, rest is earned. You wake Sunday morning in a rare bubble of leisure, the house hushed except for distant birdsong filtering through the window. Today isn't chore day, but rather preparation day for next week's pay and parish inspection. You slip out of bed in attire more comfortable than yesterday's Sunday best, a soft cotton gown that breathes and moves quietly to the washstand where a basin of warm water awaits. You splash your face, brush your teeth with a twig of birch and tie your hair back simply. No corset today, just the freedom of an unbound torso. Descending to the parlour, you find morning sunlight slanting across the rug. You pause to admire yesterday's dusting, still gleaming in gentle relief. But there's one thing left undone: the family Bible. It rests on the bookshelf, leather-bound, its spine cracked. You retrieve it, turn pages of Sunday service notes scrawled in the margins by your grandmother, and prepare it for tomorrow's family reading. Victorian families often held daily devotions. Some scholars argue these rituals fortified social cohesion, while others contend they merely reinforced hierarchies. You neither confirm nor deny, but you feel the weight of those generations in your hands. With the Bible in place, you move to the dining table for a light breakfast: cold meat from yesterday's sausages, thin slices of stale loaf and weak tea. You sip and nibble, savouring the simplicity and timing each bite. Meals without fanfare can be moments of mindfulness, and today you intend to mind every moment. After breakfast, you gather the children for Sunday school at home. You seat them in a circle on the parlour carpet, open the Bible to Psalms and read verses aloud. Their eyes widen at the poetry of "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." They repeat phrases softly as though testing new words on their tongues. You discuss that shepherd once meant a caretaker with a staff tending sheep, guiding them through dangers. A fringe fact medieval cloistered orders liken themselves to shepherds of souls, an image that persisted into Victorian sermons. The children nod, puzzled yet enchanted. When the lesson ends, you send the little ones to play outdoors under the gazebo, a small wooden structure draped with climbing roses whose petals fell in May, but still scent the air faintly. You sit in the parlour, opening a ledger book to review last month's expenses now that market day has passed. You note coal groceries, school fees and parish tithes, 1/10 of your small harvest. You calculate whether you can spare a few pence to donate extra next quarter. Victorian tithing was legally abolished in 1868, but many communities kept the tradition voluntarily. Debates persist about its impact on rural economies. You decide your conscience will guide you more than custom. Midday sunlight warms the garden when you step outside again. You inspect the herb beds: mint, rosemary, thyme and sage. Some blossoms will be needed for midweek teas. You prune carefully, ensuring each plant remains vigorous. You tuck a sprig of thyme into your gown's pocket for later. Pollinators still buzz despite the chill dipping among late-season blooms. You watch them, marvelling that even in a structured household, nature retains its unpredictability. A knock at the gate draws you back to business. It's Mr. Fletcher, the parish treasurer, come to collect next week's expected donation. You step over the threshold to meet him, dusting your hands on the front of your gown, before shaking his outstretched hand. He offers a ledger pen and quill. You sign your name, flicking ink off the tip like a practiced scribe. You hand over a silver shilling, your weekly tithe plus a little extra. Mr. Fletcher thanks you solemnly and leaves the gravel crunching under his boots. You close the gate wind, humming through fence slats. Returning indoors, you decide to prepare for next week's unexpected potential guests. You freshen the guest chamber by opening windows and airing the room. You replace the sachets with fresh lavender and chamomile plump. The pillows tuck a small pitcher of water on the nightstand and ensure the chamber pot is concealed within its lidded cupboard. Hospitality was a point of pride. Guests measured a family's standing by the quality of their spare room. Some historians argue this emphasis on hospitality cemented social ties. Others see it as performative. You focus on making the room inviting rather than perfect. Your thoughts turn to lunch. It's nearly 1 o'clock and your stomach rumbles. You head to the kitchen to prepare a simple midday meal: cabbage and potato soup thickened with barley and a side of cold eggs. While stirring the pot, you recall your grandmother's recipe handed down orally with no written record. A mainstream fact: Victorian soups formed dietary staples for the poor and wealthy alike, using local seasonal ingredients. You add cabbage hearts stripped of their tough ribs, diced potatoes, onions and a handful of barley. You season with salt, pepper, and a pinch of thyme, courtesy of the garden. The soup simmers, filling the kitchen with steamy warmth. While it cooks, you fetch the Sabbath remnants, rosemary branches, and a small bowl of almonds. You make tea brown and brisk and set the table. You ladle the soup into bowls, grate a few almonds on top, and pour tea. The family gathers, sipping and slurping in contented silence. The baby coos, reaching for the bowl, so you share a small spoonful with a gentle smile. After lunch, you clear the table and return the bowls to the scullery. You wash them by hand in warm soapy water rinse with cold and set on a rack to drip dry. You stack cloth napkins neatly by the ironed shirts. Even in repose, the household moves forward. The afternoon is yours. You decide on a leisurely stroll to the edge of the village where an ancient oak stands, a meeting place for whispered secrets and stolen kisses, long before brick terraces lined the lane. You breathe in the mossy scent and trace your fingertips on the rough bark. A local legend claims the oak was once struck by lightning on Midsummer's Eve, leaving a scar that still grows. Scholars disagree whether the lightning tale originated in the Middle Ages or during the Romantic revival of rural folklore. You smile, running your palm across centuries' worth of stories. On the way back, you pause at the small pond behind the chapel. You sit on a smooth stone, watching ripples dance across the surface as wind brushes reeds. A heron glides overhead, its wings spanning shadows across water. You close your eyes, letting the hush settle your mind. Returning home at dusk, you find the house quieter than usual, the children napping, your husband reading in his study. You hang your shawl, wipe your boots on the mat, and head upstairs to your chamber. You open the window just enough to feel the cool breeze against your face and slip into bed attire. Bitter chocolate, a rare treat your sister sent last month, waits on the nightstand. You unwrap a square, let it melt on your tongue and savour the rich darkness. You slip under the sheets, pillow scented lightly with lavender. The world outside falls into turbaned silence. You cradle the chocolate wrapper like a talisman of small joys. Tomorrow Monday's schedule returns laundry, cleaning, cooking, writing. The cycle never ends. Yet today's pockets of peace market visits, communal worship, solitary strolls renew your spirit. You drift towards sleep, threads of today's memories weaving into dreams. You awaken to the sound of distant church bells still echoing from yesterday's service, their toll a gentle reminder that Sunday's rest is over. Today is Monday once more, and with it comes the weekly review of household stock and incoming deliveries. You slip into a modest working gown, tie your hair back with a plain ribbon, and descend to the kitchen where a list awaits inked in copper plate on yesterday's ledger. The morning begins with provisions check. You open the pantry door and survey your stores, sacks of flour, barrels of dried peas, jars of preserved fruit, and the small wooden box of spices. You note that sugar has dwindled below warning level. Next, market day must prioritise it. You inspect the flour sack, still 3/4 full, and shift the barrel of peas forward so it sits easier on your hip when you carry a measure. Organisational studies of Victorian homes highlight the importance of stock rotation, and you abide by that principle, strictly rotating sacks so older provisions rest in front. Next arrives the delivery from the butcher's appointment scheduled last week. You step onto the doorstep, lift the burlap bag inside, and find 2 joints of beef and a half-dozen kidneys wrapped in oiled paper. You wish there were more meat in the budget, but you're mindful of frugality. The butcher calls out a friendly greeting from over the fence, praising your punctuality. You nod in acknowledgement as you carry the bag inside. In the kitchen, you hang the kidneys on a small hook above the sink and place the beef in a lard-lined box to keep cool. You rub the kidneys with salt and water and old tip to draw out bitterness and leave them to rest. Meat preservation was a critical skill in an era before refrigeration, and you take pride in your brine and salt techniques. With provisions secured, you tackle the task of replenishing cleaning supplies. The candle merchant will arrive with tallow candles today, but you also need more wax polish and vinegar. You locate yesterday's vinegar jug nearly empty, and refill it from the big stoneware crock in the cellar homemade cider vinegar from last year's apple harvest. Its rosy tang promises deeper cleaning power than commercial vinegar. You measure out a gallon into a refillable jug and haul the crock back down, mindful of the sloshing weight. The candle cart rattles through the lane, and soon the merchant stands on your doorstep with bundles of long white tapers. You inspect the wicks bright and scented, then count and pay. Candles are critical for evening chores and reading by lamplight. Inadequate supply means darkness or gaslight, which is still a novelty in few homes. You tuck the candles into your arms and stagger inside, marking this week's candle count in the ledger. Now it's time for linen starch. Victorian ladies favoured crisp collars and starched tablecloths, so you fetch the starch pot from the scullery. Inside the mixture of cornstarch and water simmers. You dip a small mould cloth into the solution, wring it out, and smooth it over a test square of fabric. It dries quickly before the hearth fire, becoming stiff and insulating. You approve its consistency and proceed to starch the day's collars, folds sharp as knives. Mid-morning sun splashes through windows as you refill the soap dish. You break off a chunk of domestic soap made from lard and ash and grate it finely into a jar. Soap making once a cottage industry declined with industrial soaps, but homemade bars remain gentler on delicate fabrics. You label the jar laundry soap in neat script and place it among the mending supplies. By noon, the scullery floor is a mosaic of flour dust and soap shavings. You sweep it all into a dustpan, tie it in a small bag labelled compost, and carry it outside to the heap beside the chicken coop. Everything has its cycle in your household. Food scraps feed the garden. Dust feeds the compost. Compost feeds the plants. You pause for a simple lunch of cold barley salad, soaked barley mixed with parsley, onions, and a dash of vinegar and a cup of tea. The children have returned home for midday break, fussing over the kittens in the corner. You dole out scraps of barley to the kittens, watching them purr and nuzzle for more. Cleaning outside and inside comes with many interruptions. Moments like this are rewards. After lunch, you devote time to correspondence. A letter arrived yesterday and you resolve to reply. You fetch paper, dip the quill into the freshly refilled inkwell and begin. Your handwriting flows words of thanks for your sister's recipe pamphlet inquiries about next month's linen sale, and a note inviting her for tea, assuming travel remains feasible. Letter writing keeps connections alive across miles. Even in an age of nascent telegraphs, nothing replaces the warmth of pen on paper. With the letter sealed and stamped, you turn to the front parlour where a visitor is expected, Mrs. Whittaker, the neighbourhood seamstress. She arrives to discuss alterations to your daughter's winter cloak, adding a fur lining and reinforcing seams. You invite her in, offer tea and show her the cloak. She examines the fabric, nods and sketches notes in her mind. You agree on a price and a timeline. Mrs. Whittaker departs with the cloak, promising it will be ready by Thursday. Now you face the week's toughest chore, scouring the hearth and chimney passage. You gather brushes, a small shovel and a thick cloth to wrap your hands. The fire grate has cooled, leaving cinders that must be cleared before lighting tomorrow. You scoop ashes into a metal bucket, cussing softly as hot embers emerge. The hearth bricks are lined with soot. You scrub them with a vinegar-soaked rag until they look like new. The chimney's flue is narrower at the top, so your grandmother's old chimney brush, a long coiled wire, comes down in pieces. You reassemble it, insert it into the fireplace and work the brush in gentle strokes until the flue shudders. Chimney fires were the scourge of Victorian towns, and proper sweeping prevented conflagrations. By late afternoon, your arms ache and soot dusts your hairline. You hose yourself down with a damp cloth behind the ear and wipe ash from your cheek. You stand back and admire the clean hearth, a cathedral of soot transformed into a beacon. The final task of the day is cellar inspection. You descend the narrow stairs into the damp coolness, lantern in hand. Barrels of pickles, jars of preserves potatoes stacked in burlap sacks. They stand ready for winter's demands. You check for signs of spoilage condensation on lids, pests, mould. Everything appears sound, save a few shriveled pears at the jar's lip. You toss them into the compost pile and seal the jar anew. Emerging from the cellar, you close the hatch and wipe down your hands. Smoke tendrils curl from the extinguished hearth. Candles await tomorrow's chores. The kitchen smells of vinegar and lard, comforting in its familiarity. Dinner tonight is a simple stew-root vegetables and leftover sausages served with thick slices of fresh-baked bread. You ladle portions into bowls and watch the family dine. Conversation drifts to next week's chores, the cloak's completion, and the parish gathering. You listen more than you speak, nodding as though you had the energy to spare. After supper, dishes washed and stove cooled, you fetch the household's last delight, a small piece of crystallized ginger. You savour its spicy sweetness as you settle by the hearth, reading a few lines from your novel where a lady discovers hidden courage. You close the book, stow your spectacles, and pat the collar of your gown, now slightly crease-free thanks to starch. Your chamber awaits. You hang the gown behind the door, place the day's ledger on the nightstand, and slip between sheets. You turn off the lamp, yielding to the soft dark. Outside, the night air hums through the eaves. Tomorrow the cycle renews, cleaning, cooking, mending, accounting. Yet in each rotation you find new purpose, a crumb of dignity in a loaf of dust. You close your eyes, chest rising, slowly content that the house rests as you do, ready for Monday's march. Monday dawns pale and brisk, the sky swirling with clouds that hint at rain. You slip into a sturdy dress of dark cotton. Today is ironing day, and the steam from the irons demands clothing you don't mind dampening. You lace on a tightly fitted apron, its pockets already containing ironing tools, a damp cloth, a bottle of vinegar water, and a handful of lavender sachets to scent the linens as they dry. The morning begins in the scullery, where 2 heavy flat irons rest on the stove's edge warming. These irons, cast iron slabs with wooden handles, require constant reheating. Each time an iron cools, you swap it with its twin, sliding the spent weight off the stovetop and the fresh hot slab on. Heat dances in your palms through the wood, and you remember your mother's stern warning, too hot, and you scorch both cloth and finger. Next, you gather the stack of laundered shirts and collars from yesterday's wash. White linen collars demand precision starch with cornstarch dissolved in water, smooth over a padded board, and iron from collar edge to neckline, pressing out lustrous ridges. Collars are the first impression they say, yet some modern commentators argue that stagnant linen collars served more to keep the neck cool than to display propriety. You keep heresy in the realm of debate and focus on crispness. The sleeves of shirts follow. You spread each shirt on the ironing board, pulling each cuff tight before passing the iron in deliberate strokes. Buttons click and clatter under the iron's weight. You avoid them to prevent chipping. The shirt fronts press flat, pleats spring back into place, and you marvel at the transformation from damp wrinkles to stiff, welcoming planes. While ironing, you refill the charcoal stove, small lumps of fuel that burn hot and steady. You lift an iron from the stove, test its heat on a scrap, and adjust coal levels as needed. Victorian stoves required a skilled hand to maintain steady temperature. Too little coal and the iron cools prematurely. Too much and it glows red hot, risking scorching. After the shirts, you move to the linens, tablecloths, napkins and bed sheets. Sheets are the largest challenge. You drape them over the board in folds, smoothing each section before pressing. The size tests your reach. You pivot and slide along the board's edge. A breath of steam rises from each stroke, fogging the scullery's small window. The air becomes humid, but you welcome it. Its moisture keeps dust settled below your feet. Napkins, smaller but critical for Sunday dinners and social calls, are starched more heavily for crisp corners. You fold each into a triangle press, then fold again into a fan shape or simple rectangle, as per the family's preference. Napkin shapes signal hospitality. A fan napkin implies elegance, a simple rectangle whispers practicality. You pause mid-morning to refill the kettle with fresh water, noticing the stains under the spout. You clean the kettle's lip with a damp cloth, scrubbing vinegar into the metal until it gleams. The kettle goes back on the stove and soon steam whistles. You pour tea into a pot and sip slowly, an energy boost before tackling the final items. The final ironing is for children's garments, school pinafores and the baby's nightgown. You hang an apron over the board's end, creating a makeshift pressing surface for delicate cotton. You iron pinafore ruffles, carefully smoothing each tiny fold. Patterns in children's clothing change rapidly. Today's school uniform demands precision so they appear presentable at lessons. With all linens and shirts ironed, you remove the irons from the stove and brush off ash. You let them cool on the hearth's brick edge, wiping the handles to remove sweat and dust. You pack them in a cloth cover, stowing them until next Monday. Ironing day is laborious, yet the satisfaction of hanging crisp laundry on the lines, folding stiff fabrics, and placing them neatly in the wardrobe, there is pride in the process. While drying, you fluff pillows again, reposition shades on lamps and tidy the parlour's sofa cushions. Lightning rods of effort stretch nightly, but Sunday's rest still lingers in your bones, visible as a faint spring in your step. Midday brings rain. You hurry to the laundry lines, gathering freshly washed clothes before they become sodden. You carry garments indoors, draping them over chairs and makeshift drying racks. Dampness ruins crisp linen, so you serve coffee to the children, promising biscuits once the sky's clear. Meanwhile, you reset the scullery's small cottage boiler to low simmer, generating steam to dry hanging laundry faster. Afternoon sun pokes through storm clouds and you assist hanging sheets back outside. They billow on the line like flags of victory. You spray starch on pillowcases, watching droplets bead. Soon they bask in warmth again. With the laundry stable, you finally sit for a moment, tea in one hand, a book of Victorian etiquette in the other. You read advice on how to fold a handkerchief so it conveys discreet refinement. Handkerchief etiquette was taken seriously. Folded a certain way, it signalled mourning. Another fold whispered flirtation. You practice a tri-fold, smooth corners, and tuck one into your apron pocket. Late afternoon arrives. You call the children in from their games to fetch the laundry. They help, giggling as sheets slap their faces. You supervise, rewarding speed and care. Teamwork makes the arduous task lighter. Evening's chores are minimal, lights out by 9, a quick dinner of hot stew and bread dumplings. You serve from the pot, simple, warming, efficient. You savour the flavours of root vegetables and broth steeped with herbs from Monday's harvest. After supper, you tidy the laundry racks and fold what's dry. You return pressed linens to their shelves, noting the improved order. Tomorrow the rest of the week's tasks resume, but for now, laundry stands fresh and folded, a monument to your day's dedication. You relax briefly in the parlour, reading letters by gaslight. The crackle of rain taps on window panes. The chores conclude, but accomplishments linger in every crisp fold and polished collar. You close the letter carefully, oil the letter opener blade and return it to its box. In bed sheets cool and crisp, you revel in the sensation of fresh linen against skin. Ironing. Monday concludes in the sweetest comfort, a nightly promise of simple contentment. You drift asleep, wrapped in the fruits of your labour. You awake Tuesday morning to the faint smell of last night's stewed apples still lingering in the kitchen. Today is social day, the weekly sewing circle at Mrs. Kensington's across the lane. Victorian women valued these gatherings for camaraderie, news and cooperative handiwork. While your everyday duties continue at home, dusting, cooking, gardening midweek, you step out briefly to nourish your mind as well as your household. By 8 o'clock, you're dressed in a simple calico day gown, an apron neatly tied, and a light shawl draped over your shoulders against the crisp autumn air. You tuck your basket under your arm. Inside a small pincushion, spare spools of thread, and a half-finished sampler showcasing your growing proficiency in cross-stitch. You also carry a jar of your own freshly made lavender-scented salve, a gift intended to smooth rough hands and share your household's healing hands. Crossing the yard to Mrs. Kensington's house, you pass neighbours tending early chores, Mrs. Clark hanging laundry, and Mr. Whitman repairing a fence board. You wave and they nod, acknowledging the shared ritual of social duty. In an era before widespread women's clubs, these gatherings formed the backbone of domestic solidarity, a mainstream fact often recorded in personal diaries of the era. Mrs. Kensington's parlour door stands open, revealing an inviting fire in the hearth and the soft murmur of conversation. You step inside, remove your shawl, and take a seat on a cushioned settee beside the window, where late morning light slanted through lace curtains. The room smells of beeswax polish, and the gentle aroma of potpourri in a porcelain bowl, a Victorian touch meant to purify the air against miasma, although modern scholars debate the actual efficacy of such scents. Around the low table sit 4 other women, each balancing their own basket of needlework. There's Mrs. Armitage working on a new quilt square, Miss Caldwell embroidering initials on a baby's christening gown, and Sister Beatrice mending the monastery's retreat linens. The conversation drifts naturally from the quality of last week's sermon to the rumblings of trade union strikes in the city lesson, in current affairs that your formal schooling never touched. Today's focus is buttonholes. Buttonholes may seem archaic, but they held immense importance in an age of tailored garments and fitted bodices. You remove your sampler and produce a swatch of sturdy cotton. Mrs. Kensington offers a demonstration, first a row of basting stitches, then a guiding stitch of buttonhole twist culminating in a neat bound edge. You follow her lead, pulling the thread through each tiny loop so that your buttonhole stands proud and durable. A fringe tidbit, some seamstresses used candle wax on thread to improve grip and prevent fraying a secret passed down orally across generations. Conversation pauses as you all inspect each other's work. Your buttonhole is surprisingly even, and Mrs. Kensington nods with approval. She hands you a brass thimble she found in her mother's sewing box, a relic, with initials stamped on its side. You pinch it to your finger, marvelling at its smooth interior and the sense of continuity it provides. Mid-morning tea arrives on a silver tray, delicate china cups, strong tea, milk sugar cubes, and a plate of thinly sliced lemon cake. You pour tea with careful precision, milk first, or tea first. Dependence varies by region. Londoners often added milk before tea to prevent fine china cracking, while other cities preferred the reverse. Scholars still argue which method gained precedence first, but you choose milk first, protecting the cup and soothing your nerves. You dip cake into tea, savouring crumb and beverage together. The conversation returns to local matters. Mrs. Fulton's daughter, coming home to marry the new library opening in town next month, and the rumour of a travelling photographer offering portrait sittings for $1. You consider whether to save for a family portrait, a modern luxury that few can afford but everyone admires. After tea, focus shifts back to needlework. You retrieve a length of fine silk thread to practice French knots for a floral motif on your sampler. You twirl the thread around the needle twice before piercing the fabric, pulling gently until a perfect tiny knot sits above the cloth. Repetition builds skill, and by the end of the hour your motif blooms across the white background. You step back, admiring the texture. At noon, the children's voices drift in from the street, a tumble of laughter and shouting as they return from school. You gather your things, folding the sampler gently and packing away scissors, needles and thread. You thank Mrs. Kensington and her guests for their hospitality, exchanging small compliments and future invitations. You tuck the lavender salve jar into your basket. They promise to try it for their own drying hands. On the walk home, the sun has climbed warming paths slick with autumn dew. You pop into the apothecary again to purchase a few more comfrey leaves, another key herbal remedy so you can prepare an ointment tonight. The assistant, remembering your surname, greets you with a smile. You exchange pleasantries about the weather. Local businesses thrived on these midweek visits, a fact that many modern studies of rural economies highlight. Arriving home, you head straight to the kitchen, unpack your salve and set up a small workspace on the pantry shelf. You measure melted beeswax into a bowl, add olive oil and comfrey infusion, and stir until pale mint green. You pour the mixture into small tins, setting lids loosely until cooled. The salve solidifies quickly in the cellar's cool corner. You cap each tin and label it with a neat script, hand and heel balm. The children tumble into the kitchen, faces bright with energy and clamour for hungry instruction. You fetch bread and cheese slicing for them while you taste a spoonful of the new balm. It's faintly herbal, slightly waxy but soothing. You pat it on rough fingertips. OMG relief. You pop a slice of bread in your own mouth, smiling at their childish request to have a taste too, though comfrey balm isn't meant for eating. Afternoon tasks unfold with quiet precision, hanging quilt patches to dry near a warm radiator, tending the parlour's small fern collection, and running the brass candlestick holders through a final polish. The week's social rituals demand a gleaming home. In between, you practice a few more stitches on your sampler French knots, giving way to lazy daisies and trailing vines. By late afternoon, you realise how far from the 8-hour Victorian fashion girls went. Even today's sewing circle lasted scarcely 2 hours. But these pockets of connection ripple through your week, providing emotional sustenance alongside the tangible craft. You gather your basket, tuck away tools, and reinvigorate your spirit before the evening's chores call you back to cooking and cleaning. You prepare an early dinner of lentil stew and buttered bread, serve the children, and listen as they recount their own tales, slipping on the pump handle. This morning a math problem solved at last, and their eagerness to show their Christmas pageant costume sketches to Mrs. Kensington tomorrow. As dust settles, you hang the shawl you wore this morning, still scented faintly with lavender, and fetch your corset for tomorrow's tasks. You think of the buttonholes, you learn the warmth of tea, the solidarity of shared stitches, and you carry that sense of community into the quiet of the evening. In bed, sampler tucked beside you, you drift asleep with fingers still warm from yesterday's work, murmuring strings of French knots ready for whatever chores and consolations tomorrow brings. You wake to the faint scrape of the scullery door, your husband up early stoking the cooking stove before he heads to work. It's Wednesday once again, and today's focus is fuel management and stove maintenance. Without reliable heat meals, a cold bath's unbearable, and the house a damp chill. Victorian families depended on coal and wood in equal measure, and missteps could knock a household off-kilter for days. Stepping into your day gown, you tie your apron strings tightly and head down to the cellar where last week's coal bunker sits half full. You fetch a sturdy lantern, its glass slightly smudged, and descend the narrow stairs, minding each step. The air grows cooler, damp with the earth's sigh. A single bare bulb dangles above the coal bunker, revealing a mound of small black nuggets tinted with dust and promise. First, you measure the week's coal needs. Winter months demanded daily tenders, spring promised less. Today, with rain forecast, you plan for extra damp weather burns. You scoop a shovel of coal and carry it up the stairs in a metal bucket. A practice common in Victorian households, there were no convenient coal deliveries into drawing rooms. You pause midway, catching your breath and noting how your arms ache already from hauling yesterday's water pails. Arriving in the kitchen, you empty the coal into the stove's fuel box. The cast iron grate awaits fresh lumps. You arrange them neatly, leaving spaces for airflow. Underneath, you clear yesterday's ashes with a small shovel, tapping soot from the grates to the ashpan below. Too much ash chokes the fire. Too little risks collapse. Balance is key. Next comes kindling. You retrieve a bundle of slender sticks tied with twined dry birch, gathered last autumn from the garden's border. You place them atop the coal and cradle a match to the edge. A single spark ignites the tips, the flame snatching at the kindling. Soon smoke curls upward and you slide the stove's door closed, opening the draft vent to feed oxygen. You monitor the blaze through the small glass window. New to some stoves, still a novelty in many homes, adjusting the vent wheel to regulate intensity. While the fire stabilizes, you sweep the hearth floor. A stiff bristle brush follows the damp cloth that soaked up last night's embers. You pad coal fragments to the ash pan, which you'll empty outside later. The hearth surround, once dusty, now gleams faintly in the lantern light, a triumphant result of yesterday's deep cleaning. Victorian stoves often came with built-in ovens and warming compartments. You test the oven's door handle iron, but insulated with wood to ensure the seal holds. Too loose and heat escapes. Too tight, and it risks loosening the hearth bricks. You tuck a strip of damp cloth between door and frame overnight to maintain a close fit, an old trick your grandmother taught you. With the coal fire roaring, you move to wood. Though coal is primary, wood provides quick bursts of heat for morning warmth and kettle boiling. You fetch logs from the woodpile in the yard oak ground, seasoned for months. You stack them beside the stove for easy access, mindful not to pile them too high lest they tumble. A heap of logs in midwinter could ease a day's chill or fuel a sudden need for a warmer kitchen. You place a small iron poker nearby its handle, worn smooth by years of use. Having secured fuel, you turn to maintenance. The stovepipe, a blackened iron tube leading to the chimney, requires a quick inspection. You wipe its exterior with a damp cloth to remove soot buildup, then peer into the flue opening to check for obstructions. Birds' nests, creosote deposits and loose mortar can impede flow and spark chimney fires. You shine your lantern upward. The passage looks clear, but for slight coating. In a pinch, you'll call on the chimney sweep's apprentice next month, though their heavy soot coats often leave the house dustier from the sweep's soot than the logs ever would. Next, you tend the boiler, a small water tank affixed to the stove's side. It heats water for washing and bathing. You open the boiler's cap, inspect the water level and add more from the kettle. Overfilled, it risks splutter. Underfilled, it could overheat and warp. You secure the cap and wipe away drips, testing the outlet tap to ensure the spout flows freely. Steam hissed earlier, and now the tank bubbles quietly ready by midday. Mid-morning sun filters through the kitchen window as you prepare breakfast for the household oat porridge, thickened with milk warmed by the stove, a spoonful of golden honey and a pot of strong tea. The coal fire maintains a gentle heat, and the kettle glows invitingly. You ladle porridge into bowls and place them on the worn pine table, calling the children to eat before school. Their slippers shuffle across the flagstones and they tuck into the steaming bowls with claims of hunger as loud as steam whistling. After breakfast, you return to the hearth to bank the stove, closing the draft slightly to preserve coals for the afternoon and clear the ash pan outside. You carry the pan across the yard, avoiding stepping in puddles. Outside, you tap the pan's bottom, sending ash back into the compost pile. You cover it with a tarp to keep rain from washing it away. Ash will be sprinkled on garden soil as fertilizer come planting season, its minerals a boon to vegetables. Morning chores wind down, but fuel management persists. You inspect the remaining coal in the bunker, about half remains, and shift it forward, so the fresh supply rests at the back. Future shovels scoop from the front, maintaining freshness. Coal moisture can be an issue. You prop the bunker's cover ajar slightly to allow airflow, preventing damp. Returning indoors, you wipe soot from your hands on the apron's hem and prepare for the next task, laundry scalding. The boiler, now hot, provides scalding water for linens. You fill a large copper pot with hot water from the boiler spigot and add soap flakes. You submerge the dirtiest rags, dishcloths, mop heads, greasy aprons and let them soak. The heat and lie action will lift grime, though you'll need to scrub stubborn spots by hand later. You move quickly, wearing gloves to protect your skin from the boiling liquid. Victorian households prize steam cleaning. Hot water and starch could revive linens, but modern debates question the chemical exposure. You simply focus on results laundry that smells fresh and feels clean. The children return midday with school reports in hand, each earning praise for punctual attendance. You praise them, though school fees pinch this week's budget. You ladle lunch cheese and cold meat sandwiches and refill their water bottles. The stove continues its gentle roar, a comforting presence. Afternoon chores beckon you. Sweep soot from under the stove, move pots aside to clean the hearth tiles and dust the stove's top where pots sometimes leave rings. You polish the brass knobs controlling the air vents. Over-polished brass glints like lamp finials. You buff until fingerprints vanish. Next, you tend the chimney itself. Though a full sweep will wait until autumn, you knock lightly on the masonry, listening for hollow spots that might signal loose brickwork. You touch the mortar lines with your finger. Small cracks suggest repair will be needed. You jot a note in the household ledger, repair chimney, call mason. Maintaining the flue's integrity is vital to prevent heat loss and dangerous drafts. By late afternoon, the stove's coals have settled into embers perfect for braising dinner. You prepare a casserole of root vegetables and meat scraps, placing the pot atop the stove's apex where even heat circulates. Later, the slow cooking melds flavours while you attend to other duties. As evening falls, the stove dims. You stoke it once more for nighttime warmth, tweak the draft and close the flue slightly. Smoke sighs up the chimney, carrying away the day's toil. You wipe the stove's cast iron faces with a dry cloth too much. Moisture invites rust. Dinner is served in the kitchen by lamplight, fragrant casserole, thick slices of bread and butter. The children eat eagerly, warmed by both food and stove's residual heat. You pour them each a cup of hot milk sweetened with honey, a bedtime treat. After supper, you extinguish the lantern, letting the stove's embers glow softly. You settle by the hearth with a small book of scripture and a thimble full of lavender salve, heated by the stove earlier to soothe your chapped hands. You apply the salve between stitches of memory, coal shoveling, kindling lighting, boiler tending. Each chore a stitch in the fabric of the household's warmth. Soon the fire quiets to glowing coals. You bank it, closing vents and saving fuel for the night, trusting the residual heat to ward off midnight chills. You lead the family in a brief reading psalms again, then extinguish your lamp and slip upstairs. In bed, you feel the mattress's faint warmth from the radiator in the hall below, and breathe in deep, soot-tinged air that nonetheless signifies safety and sustenance. You drift towards sleep, comforted by the knowledge that tomorrow's tasks, cooking, cleaning, mending, will be fueled by the hearth you maintain. You awaken to the muted patter of rain against the window panes, a steady drizzle that turned the lane into a ribbon of mud overnight. Today is indoor gardening and pantry management day, a Victorian household's midweek ritual, ensuring year-round food security and aesthetic flourish. You slip into a waterproof shawl before descending to the garden room, a small glass-roofed enclosure attached to the back of the house, where ferns and tender seedlings thrive under your care. First, the ferns. You step carefully across stone tiles streaked with algae, stopping at each pot Boston maidenhair and hart's tongue. The leaves are dull from the rain-saturated air. You dip a soft cloth in tepid water, mixed with a drop of milk, a vintage trick to polish foliage, then gently wipe each frond, removing dust and encouraging glossy vibrancy. Botanists debate whether milk proteins nurture leaves or merely gloss them temporarily. You side with practical shine. You repeat until each plant glows, stepping back to admire their lush green arrangement. Next, the seedlings in their terracotta pots, mustard, cress, parsley and chive bulbs sprouting pale shoots. You press nutritious soil from last season's compost around each slender stem, firming the earth without crushing roots. A mainstream fact, Victorian gardeners pioneered the use of glass houses to extend growing seasons, allowing city dwellers to enjoy fresh herbs even in winter. You water the pots gently from a copper watering can, its long spout reaching into tight clusters, ensuring soil remains moist but not waterlogged. A small table in the garden room holds potted lemon trees' buds, promising fragrant fruit come spring. You inspect each lemon for scale insects, brushing tiny spots with a damp toothbrush dipped in soapy water. Integrated pest management is new to some, but you embrace gentle remedies over harsh chemicals. The lemon leaves bristle under your care and soon appear healthier for your ministrations. Mid-morning light filters through stained glass panes, coloured segments salvaged from an old greenhouse, casting prismatic patterns on the floor. You pause, enjoying the kaleidoscope, then turn to the pantry where provisions require attention before the day's tasks multiply. The pantry door creaks open to reveal rows of jars and barrels. You inspect each mason jar of preserves, apricot jam, gooseberry jelly and pickled cucumbers. You check lids for vacuum seals. A slight tap reveals a hollow ring if the seal has failed, risking spoilage. 2 jars of cucumber brine give that hollow note. You pry off the lids, transfer the contents to fresh sterilised jars and reprocess them in simmering water to restore airtight seals. Food preservation is science in a jar, and you follow hygienic protocols: sterile jars, boiling water and timely lids, though historians still argue how widespread these techniques were among working-class families. Next, the barrels. A half-barrel of salted pork stands in the corner, its weight bulging the wooden staves. You peek beneath the brine surface for signs of mould or rancidity. The pork appears sound. You draw off a cup of brine for today's cooking, careful not to disturb the meat too much. Salted pork is a hearty staple, though modern palates wrestle with its intensity. You note to ration further brining tasks until spring. Opposite, a stone crock holds sauerkraut fermenting since late summer. You lift the weight, a smaller stone disc checking the kraut submerged beneath its salty brine. A few bubbles rise to the surface, evidence of healthy lactofermentation. You skim off any scum, stir the kraut gently with a wooden paddle, then replace the weight and cover. Fermentation cultures gut health, though medical consensus then understood only its effects, not its microbiological underpinnings. Moving along the shelves, you tally staples: rice sugar and dried beans. The sugar jar's nearly empty, an alert from this morning's kitchen inventory. You mark it in your memoranda book: purchase 5 lb sugar. Beans and rice stand at safe levels, but you decide to soak a batch overnight for tomorrow's soups, saving time on stove-heated simmering. You pour the beans into a lidded bowl cover with fresh water and place in the cooler pantry nook. A corner shelf holds artisanal bitters and tinctures your husband procured last month. You inspect bottles of gentian root horseradish vinegar and elderberry extract. You note that the horseradish vinegar, bracing and pungent, will supplement sauerkraut as a zesty accompaniment to boiled meats. You place them strategically for easy access when cooking. Your attention turns to the flours: hard wheat flour for bread, soft pastry flour for cakes, and a coarse barley flour for pottage. You test the aromas: each different: grassy barley, sweet wheat, and milky pastry. Grains stored past their prime can develop rancid notes. You whisk a sample from each sniff and give all a clean bill. You shift the sacks forward so older flour remains accessible. Having surveyed the pantry, you fetch a broom and sweep the flagstone floor, collecting dust and stray grains. You bag the sweepings for the compost heap outside No Waste in your home. Then you wipe the wooden shelves with a damp cloth, chasing away specks of flour and sugar. A knock at the door interrupts. It's the gardener with armfuls of scrap branches and trimmings from the rose arbours. "Left over for your stove," he says. Firewood and kindling often come from garden maintenance pruned branches, too small for formal fuel, but perfect for starting fires. You accept the gift, gratefully storing the sticks beside the coal stove in the scullery. Back in the garden room, you pick up the comfrey plant you transplanted last month, a medicinal herb prized for wound healing. Its roots have grown robust. You dig carefully, lift it in a small root ball, and pot it in a larger terracotta container. The garden thrives through such attentive replantings. A fringe fact: comfrey's popularity in domestic medicine soared in Victorian times, before modern herbalists raised concerns over its potential toxicity. You plant it nonetheless, for small poultices only. Noon approaches. You prepare simple lunch barley pottage from yesterday's soak garnished with parsley from the garden room and a slice of last night's rye bread. You pour tea and sip, enjoying the warmth that sustains you through damp weather. The children wander in from school, curious about the preserved fruits and shiny bottles. You let them taste a single raspberry from the preserves, watching delight bloom on their faces. Afternoon chores focus on the stable. Although not your domain, you inspect feed sacks, oats and barley for the hens and ponies' daily ration. You note the oats' quality, clear kernels, few husks, and shovel a measure into the feed trough. Animals rely on reliable grains. You cross-order more oats off your to-do list. Returning to the garden room, you take stock of water supplies. Mason jars in the pantry hold rainwater collected yesterday. You water delicate seedlings with this softened water free from chlorine or hard minerals. The practice harkens back to times when public water varied in quality. Rainwater catchment remains a wisdom of efficiency. Late afternoon light filters through the glass panes, turning dust motes into golden sparkles. You close the garden room door, gently secure the latch and step into the kitchen to hang the drying linens. You moved indoors earlier due to rain. Each item, hand towels, tea cloth, slips onto a wooden bar, drying in the stove's residual warmth. Evening falls. You light the kitchen lamp and prepare dinner salted pork braised with cabbage and potatoes seasoned with horseradish vinegar. The aroma fills the house, a creamy steam tempered by tangy vinegar. You set the table, place the salted pork at the centre and call the family to supper. They gather, voices soft against the tapping rain. You serve with care, aware that simple meals reflect your stewardship. After dinner, you clear dishes, sweep the scullery floor and refill the coal for tomorrow's chores. In chamber, you pen brief notes in the memoranda book, sugar-needed oak preservation oil for the pantry shelves, order seeds for spring planting. You place the book on its shelf and hang your shawl by the door. Lying in bed, you hear the distant drip of water from the gutters and smell the faint tang of herbs hung to dry in the scullery. You drift towards sleep, secure in the knowledge that your stewardship of garden and pantry ensures nourishment through seasons. You wake Thursday morning to the soft patter of rain on the roof, a gentle drum that blurs the line between sleep and waking. Today's focus is education and record-keeping lessons for the children and updating household accounts. In an age when formal schools might be hours away, home instruction is vital. You slip into a practical day dress cotton with a modest collar, your fingers pressed last Monday, and tie your hair back with a ribbon. You pause at the foot of the stairs, listening for each child's breath to confirm they're still asleep. Lessons begin at 9 and punctuality is as important as any lesson. By 8:30, the breakfast table is set, slices of fresh oatmeal bread, slathered in butter and mugs of warming tea with a dash of milk. The children file down sleepily, the eldest carrying a well-worn primer, the younger clutching a slate and chalk. You serve them porridge this morning, its steam curling like letters on the air. They eat quickly, the promise of lessons fueling their eagerness more than butter ever could. At 9, the premiere opens on the dining table. You begin with reading a simple sentence from the reader. The sun rises and the world awakes. You pronounce each word, deliberately pointing with a slender finger. The eldest repeats after you, sounding out world as world, then finally world. Historians note that early literacy rates in rural Victorian England varied widely. Some homes saw literacy as a basic life skill, others relegated it to clergy and professionals. You believe every child deserves the power of letters. Next comes writing practice. You provide slates and chalk for the youngest, who scribbles wobbly lines. You guide their hand to form shapes, circles, straight strokes, loops. The middle child practices cursive on paper loops for L tails, for G neat rows of letters marching across the page. A fringe detail early slate pens were sometimes fashioned from hardened clay or lead, replaced over time by chalk sticks bound with string. You hand your child a brand new chalk stick, its white powder promising countless erased mistakes. While the children tackle writing, you bring out the arithmetic block, a wooden box with numbered beads on wires, the abacus imported from factories as a classroom tool. You teach them to count beads in 5s and 10s to add and subtract with a sliding motion. 5 plus 3 makes 8, you say, and the beads click beneath their fingers. An alternative method, long division on paper, lies ahead, but today, the abacus reigns. Scholars still debate whether abacus training underpins numerical fluency better than rote paper methods. You find tangible beads more intuitive for young minds. Mid-morning brings geography. You spread a map of England across the table, an engraving coloured by hand, its counties outlined in soft pastels. You point to London capital and trade hub. You trace the River Thames with your finger and explain that barges once used timber rafts to float oak from the north to the city docks. A mainstream fact, Victorian cartographers refined mapping techniques using triangulation, producing maps with unprecedented accuracy. Yet many families owned maps too large to hang in a parlour, relegating them to lesson days only. You guide your children in naming the counties closest to your village, and beyond nurturing curiosity about places they've never seen. As the rain intensifies, tapping against the windowsill in irregular rhythms, you transition to nature study. You collect a vase of fresh nettle leaves and ferns from the garden room, placing them at the centre of the map. You describe plant structure, stems, leaf veins, serrated edges, and note that nettles were once used to treat arthritis and anemia, though modern medicine questions efficacy beyond placebo. You encourage the eldest to sketch the leaf on paper, capturing its shape. By touching the nettle through a cloth, you demonstrate practical caution against its sting. The children laugh at your novice sieve technique, but they learn respect for nature's finer points. By noon, the primer and slates close. You serve lunch a vegetable broth thickened with barley, savoury and restorative. You pour bowls and ladle soup, replenishing memory and energy. They eat in companionable silence, occasionally asking about the meanings of words from their lessons. You answer patiently, delighting in teachable moments. What is a ridge? It's the raised part between valleys, like a wave on a calm sea. After lunch comes record keeping. You retreat to your desk in the study, a neat mahogany table by the window, and open the household ledger. Ink glistens in the quill pen's nib as you add columns of expenses and receipts. Coal deliveries, flower purchases, schoolbook replacements, small donations to the parish. You meticulously note date, vendor, and amount, ensuring that each penny aligns with last week's memoranda notes. Victorian accountants relied on double-entry bookkeeping for thorough records. You adapt a simplified version for domestic use, balancing debits and credits across 2 pages. Scholars argue whether such domestic ledgers rivaled small business accounting in rigour. You know it keeps your household afloat. A sharp knock interrupts your writing. It's the buttermilk delivery, 2 pints from the dairymaid at the farm down the road. Buttermilk, once believed to promote digestion, remains a refreshing beverage despite modern alternatives. You sign the delivery log and stow the milk in the scullery. You pour a small measure into a glass, adding a splash of ginger beer from last Monday's batch. The tang brightens your spirits as you return to the ledger. Mid-afternoon, the master arrives home, reports in hand. He marks a date, next month's parish fete, and asks if you'll oversee the bake sale table. You nod already, envisioning honey ginger biscuits and small fruit tarts. His praise of your organised records reminds you that domestic management commands respect. A fringe fact, some Victorian women parlayed household record keeping into careers as governesses or estate stewards, though social norms rarely celebrated such roles. You tuck this thought into your mind. Possibilities flourish in quiet ambition. With ledger closed and buttermilk enjoyed, you resume lessons, dictation and spelling. You read a line from last night's sermon notes. Charity begins at home but does not end there. The eldest writes the phrase, slowly copying punctuation marks that challenge fine motor control. The younger spells shorter words aloud while practicing letters on the slate. You circulate between them, correcting posture grip and letter formation. Victorian pedagogy often emphasised rote memorisation. You balance it with comprehension questions. What does charity mean? The final lesson is art appreciation. You retrieve a small lithograph of a rural scene by a local artist, a family harvesting wheat at sunset. The print's gentle hues and expressive lines invite analysis. You ask, what do you see? The children note golden fields, labouring figures and a sky on fire with light. You discuss perspective foreground wheat sheaves larger than distant hills and the way light guides the eye. Art, you believe, cultivates empathy and observation more than any textbook. Lessons conclude by 5 o'clock. The children file off to play reciting multiplication tables to each other as they dash toward the garden paths. You gather your materials, slates wiped clean with damp cloths, map, rolled thoughtfully, quill washed and shelved, and close the study door. Evening chores beckon, stew on the stove, lessons recorded in tomorrow's schedule ledger tucked away. You step into the kitchen to begin supper preparations, the aroma of simmering broth, a reward for a day's intellectual labour. As dusk settles, you direct a brief review. Each child tells you their favourite lesson today. The eldest admires geography, the idea of faraway counties, while the youngest giggles over the nettle's sting avoidance trick. You praise their curiosity, reminding them that learning never ends. After dinner, you coax the children through bedtime prayers, then kiss their foreheads goodnight. You return to the study one last time, revealing faint light on the desk. You open a blank page in your personal journal, your own reflective notebook, and jot a few lines, today's lessons, successes and small improvements to make next time. Tomorrow's plan: introduce simple French phrases for cultural enrichment. You close the journal, blow out the lamp and step to the window. Rain has eased to a mist. You watch droplets trace rivulets on the glass, each path a story of moisture finding its way. Education, you remind yourself, is much the same, a journey of small drops that carve pathways of understanding. You close your eyes, ready to rest. Tomorrow, new lessons await. Today's knowledge seeds tomorrow's growth. In the hush of your home, scholarship and kindness entwine, guiding young minds into worlds both vast and intimate. You rise Friday morning to an unusual chill in the air. A frost warning came in last night's post, and today marks meat curing and charcuterie maintenance. In the Victorian era, salting, smoking and air-drying meats were crucial methods to preserve protein through the seasons. Your own butcher's box holds 2 halves of bacon waiting their turn and 1 side of ham perched on the scullery shelf. You dress in a sturdy working gown tie, back your sleeves and tie a lightweight scarf around your neck to protect from brisk drafts. In the scullery you fetch your curing supplies: rock salt, brown sugar, juniper berries and white peppercorns. You place them in small bowls on the table tools of the trade laid out precisely. A fringe detail, Victorian charcuterie, blends tartness from sugar with salt's brine, a contrast that preserves meat while enhancing flavour, a practice debated among modern food historians as either tradition or accidental innovation. First, the bacon. You unwrap the half slab from its oiled paper. It gleams pale pink, streaked with fat. You punch a hole at one end and thread coarse butcher's twine through, creating a loop to suspend it in the larder. Before hanging, however, you must rub the meat with the cure. You combine 3 parts rock salt to 1 part brown sugar, crushing it with mortar and pestle to a sandy consistency. To this you add a teaspoon of crushed juniper berries and a pinch of white pepper for subtle spice. You rub this mixture into every crevice of the bacon, ensuring it penetrates deeply, massaging it until the meat looks slightly glossy and damp. This process took hours in well-tooled estates. You complete it in 40 minutes, a testament to your practiced care. You wipe away excess cure and shake off loose granules. Then you slip the bacon into the curing box, a shallow wooden chest lined with clean oak leaves, and cover it with a cloth. The box will rest in the larder for a week, aging slowly as salt extracts moisture and intensifies flavour. Next, the ham. You tenderly cradle the heavy hock side, inspecting for blemishes. You repeat the curing sirsi-sayib salt, sugar and pepper, though here you add a hint of ground cloves for aromatic depth. You press the mixture into the ham surface, paying careful attention to the knuckle where moisture hides. Once rubbed, you tie the ham with butcher's twine at 2-inch intervals to ensure even hanging. You suspend it from a hook in the smokehouse, a small wooden annex behind the house, where oak chips smoulder, gently imparting smoky warmth that will cure the meat over 3 days. Smokehouses were once common, now only dedicated households maintain them. Some critics argue that indoor smoking filled homes with carcinogens. You see it as necessary tradition bolstered by brisk ventilation. With meats laid to cure, you shift focus to pickles. In the pantry sits a large jar of small gherkins in brine. You open the jar, lift the weight and peer in. A few cucumbers float too buoyant, suggesting imperfect fermentation. You drain the old brine into the compost bucket, nutrient-rich stock for winter garden beds, and rinse the gherkins with cool rainwater, removing scum. You prepare a fresh brine, 4 cups water, 1 cup white vinegar, 2 tablespoons rock salt, a teaspoon mustard seed, a few sprigs of dill from yesterday's garden harvesting, and crushed garlic cloves. You stir, pour over the gherkins and weigh them down with a clean stone disc. This renewed brine will transform them into crisp, tangy pickles over the next fortnight. While the gherkins settle, you turn to sausages, an ensemble stowed in the shadowy corner of the scullery. Sausages in Victoria range from savoury veal links spiced with sage to robust pork sausages with pepper and nutmeg. Today you plan to resmoke a batch from last week's butcher's ground mix. You gather the raw sausages, drape them on rack wires and carry them to the smokehouse. Inside, the fire of oak chips still glows softly. You hang the sausages, neatly spacing them evenly, so smoke circulates each curve. You prop open a ventilation window to expel heavier smoke, preventing bitter flavours. You'll leave them for 2 hours, returning to monitor occasionally. Sausage smoking is an art too long and casing toughens. Too short and flavour remains meek. Returning to the kitchen, you fetch the ledger to record curing batches, and dates a practice both practical and legal, as guild regulations once demanded curing records. You note bacon on Monday, ham on Friday, gherkins renewed today, sausages smoking time. These records guide you in safe consumption and prevent spoilage. A modern food safety debate questions home curing standards, but your diligence and Victorian wisdom, fresh air, careful measurements, divergent spices guide your confidence. Noon arrives, and with empty stomachs you assemble a midday meal of pickled beet salad, pale pink slices from last month's batch paired with fresh baked soda bread. Soda bread skips yeast proofing and relies on bicarbonate of soda, a humble leaven invented in mid-19th century Ireland and rapidly adopted in British kitchens. You slice generous wedges and pour cups of tea. The saltiness of pickled beets contrasts beautifully with the bread's tang. While the children read in the parlour, you tack window coverings in the smokehouse, thin canvas sheets, to shield sausages from damp drafts. Proper humidity is crucial. Too wet and mould appears. Too dry and sausages harden prematurely. You tweak sheets until the atmosphere feels stable, then return to the kitchen to check the smokehouse thermometer, a simple glass tube hung near the ceiling. It reads a steady 90 degrees, perfect for slow smoking without cooking the meat fully. You note this detail in your ledger. Smoke at 90 degrees, just in case you pass the recipe to a friend or a future generation. Afternoon's tasks shift to an unexpected challenge, the kitchen floor. Yesterday's rain tracked mud inside, and a spot near the sink glistens stubbornly. You fetch hot water and a mop, but the wooden planks demand polishing too. You mix linseed oil with a dab of turpentine, an old remedy for worn floors, apply with cloths and buff until the grains gleam. The pungent smell lingers, but you know it dissipates by tomorrow morning. A scrubbed and oiled floor not only repels future dirt but honours the craft of homekeeping. As dusk falls, you step to the smokehouse once more. The sausages appear a deeper hue. A faint smoke scent wafts from the lightly ajar window. You turn off the chip fire seal vents and leave the sausages to rest until morning. Tomorrow you'll taste and sample for readiness, pairing with cold rye bread for breakfast. In the scullery you wash tools, mortar pestle, brimming bowls and tongs. You wipe counters with vinegar water to remove curing residue and reset the space for tomorrow's tasks, laundry and mending again. Dinner tonight is modest, a stew thickened with barley and diced root vegetables, a farewell to fresh produce before winter tightens its grip. You serve bowls of steaming comfort, savouring simplicity after a day of complex preservation. After supper you collapse into the parlour chair with ledger in hand. You note costs of curing supplies, salt, sugar, juniper berries, calculating cost per pound of bacon cured. You update next week's grocery list, more rock salt, additional vinegar and extra butcher's twine. The ledger's pages fill with entries that tell your household story in precise measures. You extinguish the lamp and step to the window. The moon glows behind cloud banks, silvering wet branches. You breathe in damp night air tinged with smoke from the smokehouse. Your home rests on shelves and hooks bearing meats that will feed your family for months. Preservation is a form of hope, believing that care today yields sustenance tomorrow. You slip into bed, sheet cold and crisp from Monday's ironing. Bacon and ham cure in cool darkness. Pickles ferment in jars. Sausages hang like fruits of labour. You close your eyes, heart buoyed by Friday's tradition of preservation. Winter approaches, but your pantry and smokehouse stand ready, a testament to meticulous care across seasons. Saturday morning dawns crisp and bright, a welcome change from yesterday's rain. Today's focus is linens deep clean and wardrobe turnover, preparing spring to winter clothing rotation. Victorian fashion demanded multiple wardrobes, day dresses, afternoon dresses, and specialised gowns, yet you must manage limited closet space. You dress in a sturdy calico smock and tie an old shawl around your shoulders to ward off dust. Your first task is the weekly curtain laundering. You carry the long linen panels from the parlour windows to the scullery, hanging them across a wooden rack. You prepare a sudsy wash tub, filling it with warm water and grated soap flakes mixed with a dash of laundry starch for added crispness. You scrub the curtains gently at the top and bottom edges where dust gathers, then rinse thoroughly. You hang them back on the rack, carefully smoothing creases. The morning sun streams through the scullery window, accelerating drying. Next, the family's fall and winter wardrobes await in storage trunks. You open the first trunk, day dresses folded atop stately jackets, and breathe in the faint musk of mothballs. You inspect each garment for moth damage. A single small hole on a wool skirt prompts immediate mending. You knot extra thin wool yarn onto the damaged area, weaving the weave back together. A fringe note. Victorian mothballing used naphthalene, later debated for health risks, but still prized for its efficacy against pests. You rotate seasonal attire, light cotton gowns move into the front of the wardrobe, heavier wool and velvet garments shift to the back storage chest. You adjust hangers accordingly, ensuring each gown shoulders rest on padded wood to preserve shape. You reorganize boots, sturdy leather for muddy days, move next to the door. Fine ankle boots repositioned near the dressing mirror. Accessories follow parasols and straw hats for summer, stored in upper bins. Practical woolen caps and mittens placed in a basket by the hearth. Midday, you tackle bed linen rotation. You strip mattresses of summer's fine cotton sheets, replacing them with warmer flannel sheets that you prepped days earlier. Flannel, once a workman's fabric, found favour in parlours for its insulating properties. You layer blankets, a cotton coverlet, a woolen blanket and a heavy quilt atop. You fold the lighter linens and stow them in the cedar-lined chest beneath the bed. Cedar's aroma deters moths and freshens fabrics. though botanists debate the longevity of its repellent qualities. With wardrobe and bed linens arranged, you turn attention to the table linens. You retrieve the starched and ironed tablecloths from Monday's efforts and drape them neatly across the dining table. You place cloth napkins in napkin rings, each silver ring polished to a sheen. You prep the sideboard with polished silverware and china plates for tomorrow's formal luncheon with church ladies. An unusual visitor arrives, the draper's assistant, bearing swatches of new fabrics for a spring frock. You examine samples of silk muslin and taffeta, each whispering possibilities. While fashion often dictated bright pastels in spring, you lean towards subdued paisley patterns. You pin swatches to your gown for colour comparison, imagining how they'll drape. The assistant notes your choices and departs, leaving you to dream of future garments. Late afternoon, you sweep the entire wardrobe area with a fine bristle brush, gathering dust that settled during rotation. You wipe wooden shelves with a vinegar water solution, then polish with beeswax. The floor under the wardrobe, once concealed, required attention. You scrub the flagstones clean using hot water and soap. You rinse with clear water and mop dry. By evening, the house stands refreshed. Wardrobes, neatly closed linens ready for seasonal comfort, and table prepared for formal gatherings. You join the family for supper roasted root vegetables and pot roast slow cooked atop the stove. The tablecloth beneath china gleams white, a testament to Saturday's efforts. After supper, you display a new swatch of taffeta on the parlour settee and discuss spring patterns with your husband. He admires your eye for colour and pattern harmony, a small compliment that warms your spirit more than the stove's coals. As dusk deepens, you hang your day dress back in the rotated wardrobe, replace your smock with a nightgown, and change the shawl for a lighter wrap. The house exudes order and readiness for the coming season. In bed, you rest beneath the quilt you adjusted this afternoon, its weight comforting against the chill. You trace your fingers along the stitch patterns and drift to sleep, satisfied that seasonal labours have prepared your home for winter's embrace. Sunday morning arrives gentle and serene. Today is the monthly church luncheon and honour guard of hospitality. You rise early, dressed in your finest, an afternoon silk gown of muted lavender trimmed with lace. Though simple elegance rather than ostentation defines your taste, your corset tightens just enough a final reminder of Victorian poise. You gather the welcome committee at the dining table, 6 church ladies each bearing a dish. You position platters, cold quiche, fruit-filled pastries, honey-glazed ham slices and dainty cucumber sandwiches. A large tureen of mustard pea soup stands at the centre, steam drifting upward. You arrange plates and silverware around the long oak table, adjust crystal glasses for iced tea and place small vases of fresh-cut wildflowers, an informal bouquet that carries meadow scents indoors. At noon, guests arrive. You greet each with a curtsy and a warm smile guiding them to seats. Conversation hums softly. Church fundraisers, upcoming charity bazaars, and the miracle of last week's stable repair. Hospitality in Victorian times extended beyond food. It conveyed solidarity and shared purpose. Scholars point to luncheons as critical social networks for women's philanthropy. You serve each guest personally, ensuring teacups brim gently and note nods of appreciation. The luncheon lasts 2 hours. You listen to Mrs. Aldridge's tale of her nephew's apprenticeship and Miss Henderson's proposal for a reading circle at the parish library. You share small stories, your butcher's ham wrapping technique, the garden room's new seedling experiments, and the smokehouse's curing success. Laughter peppers the table, mingling with clinking glass and gentle music from the parlour's piano. After luncheon, you oversee a quick prayer offering thanks for shared blessings and intercessions for those in need. You close with a soft hymn humming through the rafters, voices blending in reverent harmony. Guests depart by mid-afternoon. You assist with clearing plates, washing and drying, serving dishes, and returning linens to their rack. You wipe the table-polished silverware once more and stow flowers in water for the hearth mantle. the house settles into quiet again. You dress down into a simple apron, tidy the hearth, and prepare a light supper for the family fresh fish from yesterday's market smokehouse batch, served with boiled potatoes and butter. After supper, you retire to your chamber for reflection. You place a sprig of lavender beneath your pillow and open your personal journal. You pen brief notes: meat curing mastery wardrobe rotation, success, and the joy of communal lunch. You reflect on letters received and the week's lessons for the children. Finally, you draft tomorrow's to-do list in shorthand, mending torn gloves, ordering more cedar oil, repairing the stove's draft vent, and preparing a new cloth for the garden room table. You extinguish the bedside lamp and slip beneath the freshly rotated winter linens. The room feels snug, the result of seasonal care linen management and meticulous preparation. You inhale the faint scents of lavender cedar and faint coal embers, each hallmark of a home stewarded across seasons. Closing your eyes, you draw the week's curtain of memories: steaming teas, the click of an abacus, the rhythmic rub of curing salt, and the soft scissors of needlework. Each day's labour stitched into the tapestry of your home, each ritual weaving comfort and order. Now, as the house settles into hush, and the stove's embers glow gentle warmth, you can ease out of your steadfast rhythm. Remember how each stitch in the linens, each fired coal, and each polished surface was a quiet act of care, both practical and tender. Your efforts, though humble, in the vast tapestry of history echo centuries of women nurturing homes, communities and families with mindful hands. Tonight, let your breath slow in time with the lingering hush. Feel the cool weight of the quilt across your chest, soft against flannel sheets. Let the faint scent of lavender from the pillow remind you of garden serenades and fragrant blooms preserved against winter's chill. Allow your mind to drift over the week's tapestry, the crisp curtains, the cured meats, the gleaming silver, and the children's bright eyes in lessons learned. There is beauty in repetition, comfort in clean spaces, and solace in shared meals. The world outside may fussen its pace, but here, within these walls, time moves in easing pulses, dust-cleared socks, mended fire stoked and stories shared. Rest in the knowledge that tomorrow's chores await, but tonight no iron glides across linens, no coal leaps in the hearth, no ledger beckons. Allow your senses to soften the earthy aroma of cedar, the gentle tick of the mantel clock, the muted whisper of fabric in the closet, all lull you deeper into calm. Each breath a promise of renewal, each heartbeat a testament to tireless devotion. Now drift inward into the haven you nurtured. May sleep find you as gently as dawn's first light. Sweet dreams, and may the rhythms of care cradle you through the night. End of story. Sweet dreams.